There it goes.
Here we go. Yep. Good evening. We're going to call the meeting to order for the Walker Planning Commission for Wednesday, January 17, 2024. First item on the agenda is a review of the meeting minutes. We've got minutes from December 20 as well as January 3 in our packet. So first for the December 20, any comments, questions, changes for the December 20 meeting minutes? Okay, see none.
Motion to approve.
Support. I have a motion by Tyler, supported by Pat, to approve the minutes for December 20. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now, as we look at the January 3, 2024 minutes, any comments, corrections?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Support.
Okay, we have a motion by Elena, supported by Tyler, to approve the minutes for January 3, 2024. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. At this point, it's an opportunity for general public comment, and we're looking. We've got a couple of. We've got a hearing, and then we've got a project that has had public hearing closed on it, and we're going to talk amongst us to get a consensus of whether or not to take additional public comment. But if you have something that's outside the realm of these two projects right here that you'd like to share with the rest of us, please step forward, give us your name, address, and you've got 3 minutes to make a statement. Okay, no takers on that. We'll move right into the agenda items. First one is a public hearing, case number 23-033, and have Frank Wash, Community Development Director, introduce the project.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I'm sitting in for Paula on short notice, so bear with me a little bit, and we'll walk through Paula's staff report, and then I'll ask you to go through Scott's staff report because a lot of this site is engineering related. So the plan that you see in front of you is a final area site plan that should look familiar. This is the northeastern corner of Wilson Avenue and Leonard Street. We used to call it the Lewis Farms Mixed Plan Unit Development, and then this corner was changed to Commercial Plan Unit Development. And you, on July 19th of 2023, you approved a final area site plan for this project. And in Paula's report, she notes all of the conditions of approval from that date. And I think what she's getting across there is those conditions should carry forward, except as modified tonight, based on the content of the plan. And in her staff report on page 2, and the staff report is cover dated January 11th, 2024, on page 2 of 6, and kind of the center of the page, she lists elements that have changed and that triggered this additional review of a major amendment to an approved FASP. She notes that the branding and signage is changing to Maverik, who apparently bought Come and Go. So we have a new business with the same use. The building size has been downgraded from 5620 square feet to 4425 square feet. The parking spaces have gone up from 29 to 41, and the spaces now wrap around the building. Maybe that was an item of discussion at previous plans. The sidewalk and ADA plan has shifted a little bit, with the sidewalk from Leonard North along the west side of the access road being removed. And it looks like there's one on the east side up against the future residential. The location of the underground storage tanks for the gasoline has moved from south of the canopy to west of the canopy. Utility plan, I'm sure Scott will cover. Canopy and fuel dispensers, looks like they've gone from 8 to 5, placed at a different angle. But there is a possible expansion to 10 at a future date if needed. The dumpster has shifted from the northeast to the southeast corner of the building. And then I'm sure Scott will cover change to Wilson Avenue with the turn lane at the north entrance being longer than that approved for the come and go. And also on page 3 of 6 of Paula's report, she talks about changes to the signage plan. And she notes that the PUD sign should be scaled down proportionately to be a maximum of 12 feet in height. And setback dimensions should be added to the plan, and the sign has to be at least 10 feet from the right-of-way or the driveway. She notes that the sign at the intersection must be for the corner business only and must meet the requirements of the sign ordinance, maximum 8 feet in height and 48 square feet in area. She notes that both freestanding signs must have a masonry base, and she is comfortable with the wall and canopy sign as proposed. So I think you wrap all that together, and she's recommending a conditional approval, subject to what's in her staff report, what's in Scott's staff report, and then some final administrative things as far as follow-up with plans and digital copies. So that covers her report, and I'll hand it back to you for Scott's report.
Commissioners, first, any questions for Frank as far as the planning perspective on this project? No. Frank, one thing with regard to the sidewalk, and we'll ask this of the applicant as well. As I recall, when we had the initial final site plan, there was some desire to establish a pedestrian connection to the east. There's a lot of residential development, a variety of residential development to the east and to the northeast, as well as to the north. And that connectivity from the building across that to the drive that runs along the east line of this is lost. And but Paula had noted that, but didn't provide any additional perspective. But again, we can ask that of the developer as we go forward.
Yeah, probably a good question for the developer, and I know Scott is involved quite a bit with sidewalks on Leonard Street, so maybe he can fill it in. What I see on the plan is there is kind of a mid-block connection to the front door of the store. You can see that at the bottom of the plan. So that's something good. That's something that's actually is in the new zoning ordinance for commercial. So I would say that's a positive, but if there's something that's changed in this area, it appears that there's still a sidewalk along the east side, and this is the proposed,
Is there a sidewalk on that west side too along Wilson there?
yeah, that's,
Okay.
I believe so. That's pretty standard to put, and Scott can help us out here. Yep, goes through the driveway into the north property line. So.
Yeah. Well, we can address that with the developer then. At this point then, we'll switch to Scott Connors, the city engineer, for his comments.
It's good to have Frank back by my side again, just like the old days, deferring all the tough questions to engineering. So here we go. You do have, well, first of all, this plan set, I think it was 52 pages. It's so big that it doesn't fit on the table, and it has to be hidden underneath. I dropped it in the snow probably twice last week carrying it around trying to get through that. So we have to be a little realistic about how much detail we were able to review and compare to the previous approval. There's probably a few items in here that we didn't catch. Paula as well. I know she was having a hard time with that. But our review from July of 2023 should still be valid and should still be considered as part of your review and potentially a condition of approval, because there were a lot of items in that memo. There were 2 pages worth. So I would ask for you to consider those. A couple new items. There's something that I think we did miss the last time around. In our many months and years of deliberation on the Lewis Farms project, we've talked about adding 10 feet of right-of-way along Wilson. We do that with pretty much every project that comes in along Wilson, because we want to make sure that someday, when that's widened, the city and MDOT have enough right-of-way there to do what's needed. We didn't get that here, but here they are back again in front of us with an amendment. So I think this is a good chance to bring that back up and have that discussion. It doesn't necessarily have to be right-of-way. It could be right-of-way easement, because it's most likely going to have sidewalk in it, being at the far edge of the road. The key thing is to make sure that you can get those extra lanes in there in the future, because we don't need any impediments to that. We've got enough impediments to getting Wilson widened. So hopefully we can talk about that. The sanitary sewer and water main plans in the drawing set are going to have to be updated and revised to meet the Grand Rapids specifications. I think Atwell put a lot of effort into those, and I feel bad. We've talked about it a number of times, but they are part of the Grand Rapids system, and they'll have to meet all those specifications. And again, that's a pretty long process, so I would hope that if this moves forward, they get that started, and that isn't an impediment to them getting started. And then the last new item would be the water main easement on the east side of the plan. Has a pretty extensive landscape buffer in it. I think we could probably live with some bushes and things like that, but trees that are as big as 2.5-inch caliper to start with are intended to get much bigger, and we don't want those over the water main. So I think that's going to have to be adjusted, or the water main may have to be moved out of that area. And certainly if it was moved into the aisle itself or the driveway, we're comfortable with that because the road itself provides protection for those utilities underneath. So that would be it for us as far as new items.
Commissioners, are there any questions for Scott on his report? Okay, thank you. At this point, representatives from the applicant, again, step forward, give us your name, who you're affiliated with, and bring us up to date on your project.
Great, no, thank you. My name is Mike McPherson. I'm with Atwell, civil engineering consultant for Maverik. As alluded to, Come and Go was purchased by Maverik. So essentially, this is a rebranding of the same project that you guys reviewed and approved last summer. As noted, there are a couple, obviously a few changes. I think the intent of the layout and the project remains exactly the same as previous. The Maverik building is a little bit smaller. The canopy is got a little bit of an angle to it. The building elevation is a little bit different, as you can see in the plans. All the road improvements remain the same. The restrictions for access on Leonard are the same. The turn lane on Wilson is longer. That is a result of MDOT review. So it's actually increased, I guess, in a good way from the city's perspective. Regarding the sidewalk, I think previously there was an additional sidewalk basically going up both sides of that access drive towards the east. We felt it was fairly redundant going along both sides, so we did remove one side. That being said, if commission is basically looking for connection from the store to the east to the walk that goes up towards the future apartments, we could accommodate a walk and a crosswalk going that direction, if that's what I'm hearing the intent is. So just look for a little bit of feedback on that, but we can definitely work with you on that. The 10-foot right of way on Wilson, I guess that is kind of a new item to us as well, Scott. I generally wouldn't have too much of an issue with it as long as it doesn't affect, the site design and the setbacks and the domino effect. You know what I mean? So we can certainly talk about that. We can talk to MDOT to see what their plans are. There is quite a bit of right of way there already. There will be 4 and then 5 lanes in certain areas along there constructed. So I'm not sure if it's 100% needed, but that's something we certainly work with the city on. The one question that I did want to bring up that was briefly touched on was the site signage. And I know there's some comments from Paula in the packet. We were proposing 2 site signs, one at the southwest corner, kind of right at the intersection, if you may, and one to the north along Wilson, kind of at the north, towards the north end of the commercial property. The intent is to only have 2 signs, and there would be blank panels for now, that would be utilized by future developments of the outlots, essentially. And that's kind of what we talked about at the last meeting. So the signs as proposed are a little bit larger than the ordinance minimum. I know in the letter it requests that the sign at the hard corner, at the south side, to be 8 feet tall. If at all, we'd like consideration of that one being the 12-foot sign and the other one being the 8-foot sign, since the sign at the corner would be the most visible, the best for all the tenants and things, to direct traffic. We would like that consideration, if possible, so. Otherwise, I mean, as stated, yeah, you know, the layout, the landscaping, the lighting, the access, everything, all the intent remains the same as what was previously submitted. Understanding this is a major revision, you know, which is triggered just by some building square footage percentages and things like that, but we're not looking to make a major change or, you know, to the actual project itself. So, happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
We've talked about this quite a bit. It's on the corner there, and I certainly think that 10-foot right-of-way, as Scott has suggested, should be thrown into this. They've changed their plans, we haven't, so I think they could help us out on that one.
Mark, any? Pat?
I would agree with him.
Elena?
Yeah, I agree with Joe on that. Could you just say that question about the sign again that you were just saying?
Yeah, so, we're proposing two ground signs. One is at the intersection, which is the south, west
West
corner,
side.
where the two, you know, right at where the two roads come together, Leonard and Wilson. And the other one is north along Wilson, towards the north side of the commercial development. In the letter, it basically is suggesting that the sign at the intersection, the southwest corner, be 8 feet tall, and the one to the north be 12 feet tall. We would like consideration for the one at the intersection to be the 12-foot tall one, and the one further north to be the 8-foot tall one. The one closer to the residential be shorter.
Scott, do we have anything on that for sign height like that right at that intersection there for clear vision area at all or anything?
It's generally something that we look at during site plan review. This one did not come back to site plan review, so we haven't looked in any great detail. So I would really defer more to zoning here.
Yeah.
You know, with the signal there, we really don't go after clear vision corners too often. But, you know, certainly our friends at MDOT could step in and do that as part of, you know, their overall permit that's required for this job.
Just was wondering if that bigger sign is more helpful at the north side to draw people towards that drive, because that drive isn't gonna be, it's not intuitive for people to think that they have to go past the building to then go back to it. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, as far as the clear vision goes, obviously we're meeting all the setbacks, and the clear vision from the current road should be fine, but agree with Scott, that'll be something that MDOT is reviewing, and they currently are reviewing. Our concern is the sign at the corner is gonna be the sign that, people on both streets, have visibility for. So we'd really like to capture the traffic from both directions with the taller sign, have the one to the north, the shorter one. It's closer to residential, that'd be the one that kind of identifies, okay, here's an entrance point, where you come in, but the one on the corner kind of grabbing traffic from both directions.
Now, in terms of the size that you're asking for as compared to Paula's comment.
We had previously asked for a 15-foot tall. I know Paula is stating 12 for the taller one. We can live with 12, that's fine. But we would like that 12-foot one to be at the south side. Understanding that the ordinance requirement is 8, but this being, you know, a PD, basically. As we discussed at the last meeting, we have limited the amount of ground signage on this to 2 signs, to whereas more than that could be put in here when these future outlets are developed. So basically what we're saying is that this will be it for the ground signage. These future outlets will be, you know, have panels on these. There won't be additional signage that cluttering up the road. So we think that would be a better look than.
What's the square footage of the sign that you're proposing as opposed to what was approved
Yeah, I can
first time?
tell you real quick here. It's 72 square feet in total.
That's what's being proposed?
Yes.
Okay. And for the northernmost sign?
What we were proposing was the same, but we're willing to modify that to be in compliance with the 8 and the 48, I believe is what it is.
Okay. All right, thank you. Elena, did you have anything else? Okay. Patrick?
This is Tom. With everyone pretty much needing to use that north entrance to get there, to get into the station, I can't tell how wide that drive is to kind of come back to the south. 40 foot.
Yeah, go to,
Yes.
not this plan sheet, sorry.
Yeah,
Go to plan sheet 3.
you're correct. It is 40 feet. You know, and obviously we have that designed for not only convenient customer traffic for trucks, you know, fuel deliveries, things like that. So it's of adequate width for that,
Okay.
if that's the question.
The fuel trucks, they'll be coming in generally off of Wilson?
That is correct. They'll be coming in off of Wilson and they'll be exiting to Wilson.
Okay.
On sheet 4, there's a depiction for you if you're curious.
Lender's not a truck route, no. Yeah, Lender's not a truck route, so it has to.
Correct.
Longer taper. As far as the reduction in the size of the building, what the
Just-
reason for that?
It's Maverik's equivalent prototype to what the come and go 5,500 square foot one was basically. So, you know, all retailers have their own prototype sizes and this was their equivalent prototype size. So that just happened to be the 4,400 and change square feet.
Did the first building size though anticipate additional tenants within in that
Not within the
building?
building. This one doesn't either. There won't be additional tenants in the building.
Okay.
Nope.
And the 8 versus 5, is it truly 8 places to gas up, or are there 16?
There's 5. We've actually reduced it from the last plan. Last one had
Yep.
8 MPDs. This one has 5 MPDs, so there's technically 10 places to gas up, one on
Okay.
each side of the pumps, like, in this scenario.
So that accounts for even though there's 5 places there, you're gonna have accommodation for 10 vehicles to be.
So, yeah, one on each side, yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
And, I guess the last thing from my standpoint is that having a sidewalk connection east from the building over to the, you got an island in there. And so have it striped, similar to have your connection over to, out to Leonard.
Right.
Have that go eastward across this. I think the point was made that a lot of people that will be living in there, there's not gonna be a drive interconnection there, but the pedestrian interconnection would allow for people to get back and forth along through that area.
We would be agreeable to that. That's not a problem.
In terms of the notations by the city engineer, are there any that you have issue with that, as it's recommended from the?
No, I mean, we've looked through them. We obviously, you know, Scott's been great in answering questions and things as we've gone through this process here. You know, understand there's more reviews and permits and everything that we still need to go through here. Nothing of great concern. I guess the right of way would be the only one that kind of popped up that, you know, I don't foresee a large concern with that as long as it doesn't have a domino effect and push our whole site over, basically. You know, that's what I'm concerned about, and I guess we'll take a little more research and consideration from you folks on that.
Yeah, I guess immediately, if you look at the landscape plan, that's where there may be some immediate,
There's 20 feet of landscape buffer there right now,
Yep.
so if the matter is like, okay, there's 10 foot of future right of way, and maybe 10 of that 20 feet would be utilized, by MDOT in the future if things push out. I don't foresee an issue with that, but if we need to make that 30 feet to accommodate it, then that causes us an issue of going, dominoing across the site.
So that could perhaps be worked out at the staff level with both
Absolutely.
engineering and
We work-
planning for that.
I have no issue working with staff to make sure we're coordinated on that, yes.
I would recommend that you consider a right-of-way easement there, so it doesn't impact their setbacks or anything, but it allows us to work and maybe eliminate some of that landscaping in the future. And when I say future, I mean 20 years from now. There's not a plan in place, unfortunately, to widen that road yet. We just don't want to box ourselves out.
Okay.
Good point.
And most likely the landscaping is probably always gonna remain. My thought is if it ever gets widened out anymore, that might be like utility corridor or some kind of need for that and associated with the road. I couldn't see the actual physical road actually, getting that wide, so.
I can though, so let's plan for it.
Yep. All right. Any other comments or questions? Had some conversation here. Is anyone ready to offer a motion on this project?
Sorry, did you open the public hearing? Oh, no.
No, I didn't.
Sorry, I'm not.
Very good.
Sorry, I'm late. Make a motion to open the public hearing.
We have a motion by Tyler, supported by Patrick, to open the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. That was my bad. At this point, if there's anyone here that would like to come forward and offer any comment on this project, please step forward, give us your name and address. All right, no takers.
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll support.
Motion by Tyler, supported by Elena, to close the public hearing. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now, do we have, thank you, Jeff. Now we have entertaining a motion on this particular project.
I'll make a motion for case number 23-033 for 1500 Wilson Avenue Northwest for the PASP amendment. Based on the application material provided, I make a motion to approve the amendment to the final area site plan for the convenience store and vehicle fuel station development for Maverik at 1500 Wilson in accordance with the plan date dated 12/19/23, subject to the following conditions and based on the finding facts noted below. Conditions of the final area site plan approval: the applicant shall address all of the items outlined in the planning director's report dated January 11, 2024. 2, the applicant shall address all the items outlined in the city engineer's report dated January 10, 2024. Scott, do we need to update that to say easement, or did you have that in that memo? Okay,
I don't think it was very clear. I would recommend it that way if that's what the planning commission desires.
okay. And then 3, the applicant shall provide 3 sets of sealed civil engineered site plans incorporating the recommendations, conditions to the community development department prior to the issuance of the building or stormwater permit. 4, that we have 10 foot of right-of-way easement on the west side of the property along M11. Findings of facts per section 94-213, the amendment to the FASP as illustrated and described by the original FASP and in this amendment continues to meet the standards for planned unit development generally and for commercial planned unit development specifically as contained in sections 94-213, 94-217, and 94-185 of the Walker Zoning Code. The FASP as amended herein remains in substantial compliance with the previously approved Lewis Farms West PSSP and the Come and Go FASP consisting of the maps and accompanying written materials under the section 94-213 of the Walker Zoning Code. Yes, Frank.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, can I just ask for clarification on the signage change that you've been discussing? And then the easterly sidewalk connection from the building to the sidewalk, are those amendments to the staff reports?
I think they
Yeah, yeah.
would represent amendments.
Yep. Do you want me to put those on as like items 4 and 5?
I think I can
Five and
cover those in the notes I'll give to Paula. But what it sounds like is the PUD sign that's currently 12 feet, 72 square feet, would be moved to the southwesterly corner, and the 8 feet, 48 square feet sign would move to the north of the driveway. Is that what we're talking about? Okay, I'm getting nods. All right. And then I assume you want to do the easterly sidewalk connection. They need to hash that in.
Yep.
Okay, I'll make those notes. Thank you.
And that, you make that part of your motion then?
Yeah, do you want me to put that as like item 5 and 6? Okay, conditions to the final area site plan review approval, number 4, to add, easterly connection for the sidewalk from the convenience store to the east. And then, what's that, 6 would be to change the sign height from, at the northerly one to the 8-foot and the southerly one to the 12-foot.
Okay. Is there support?
I'll support.
Okay.
Hey,
So it's a
Terry, I
motion.
have one. The original final area site plan that we approved, there was discussion of that the left-hand turn signal had to be in place on Leonard Street. I don't know if that, I didn't see it covered anywhere in the write-up. Is that still enforced by item, that's, by the condition says that the FASP as amended here and remains in substantial compliance? I mean, does that cover it, or?
Well, I believe that was a condition in the first time through, and they aren't proposing any change to that aspect of it, so.
That's correct, and that is an update that MDOT is currently doing. My understanding is that they'll be constructing that sometime next year. So they should be ahead of our construction with that.
But you make a good point. With that condition in force, that may delay your occupancy of the building until that,
Yeah. I guess what I would say is that I would suggest that the same conditions as the previous approval on that end hold, because what we discussed, if you remember, was a kind of a phased approach, to whereas just the convenience could come online before the MDOT updates were done, but none of the other improvements could. There was like 3 phases of what had to be done before what could be opened, and I would propose that we follow that same methodology as we previously discussed and approved.
I think he's right on that.
yeah. So that may suggest, just for clarification, that would remain in force.
Item 7 of the condition for the final area site plan is that we follow through on the previously approved FASP with the phasing in of it until MDOT can update the signal at Leonard and Wilson.
Okay.
Support.
Okay. Now, I think we covered all the bases. That's good catches on that. So we've got the motion on the floor by Elena, supported by Tyler. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Okay, next item on the agenda, case number 23-028, and I'll again hand it off to Community Development Director Frank Wash.
Okay, give me 1 second so we can switch gears here. I'm going to put up one plan for River Ridge, and we can move around on the plan set if you like. And again, I'm in the middle of this review process, so I don't want to get off track, or, you folks have been reviewing this for quite some time, so I'm not going to add too much to it. I will say that Paul has given you a staff report, and it is dated, what is the cover date on this? January 11th, 2024, and she gives kind of a history of your reviews. And the reviews actually started back in early 2022, I believe, on this one. And the plan has gone through various updates and changes, so I think that's why it's a good idea to look at the updated plan and see how responsive, yes or no, it's been to the tabling conditions that you've had in the past. So on page 4 of 11 of Paula's report, she gives the short historical overview, including the last tabling, which was on December 6, 2023. And the last bullet that she has there is the project was tabled until January 17th, 2024, pending an analysis regarding the proposed plan's compliance with the master plan. So that was your condition of, your main condition of tabling for that after you did some administrative decision making. So you do have a report in your packet from Chris Corey, who was our master plan consultant. And you can feel free to discuss that, and I'll do what I can to fill in the blanks on that. And I think it's fairly black and white on Chris's comments. The other thing that I'll point out is on page 5 and 6 of Paula's report, she lists all of the conditions of tabling. One is dated from let's see, June 1st, 2022. There's a long list on page 5. And then on page 6, there's a list from, looks like February 1, 2023. And she did give you kind of a summary of all of those. And there is a sheet in front of you to help you navigate those. I'm more than willing to walk through those tabling items with you. I think it's a good idea just to see what the applicant has provided and maybe what the applicant hasn't provided, so we can go through that. Paula's report does make a recommendation for a conditional approval, and I can see why, from a technical standpoint, based on the code, she might make that suggestion. But there's just a couple of things that I would like to raise for you, and this is subject to debate. If you look at our zoning ordinance in our PUD code, and this is section 94213, the Planning Commission is charged with, the applicant is actually charged with proving compliance with the city's general development plan, which is our master plan. So I think you've got a letter from the applicant on that, so that's certainly something you want to go through. And then one of the Planning Commission's findings of fact is, where is that bad boy? Number 1, G1, the proposed development shall conform to the city's general development plan or any part thereof. And here's where I deviate a little bit from what Paula is saying. And again, these are professional opinions. You can certainly agree or disagree with them. Even amongst staff, we have some differing opinions. But what I would look at is this. This is your community character map from the 2020 master plan. So just to orient everyone, here's I-96 and 131, the major intersection. This is the Greenridge Shopping Center. And then these are the subdivisions and the large lot homes that go down to West River Drive. And then the Kingsbury Gage neighborhood. And right in the middle here are the subject properties. And what I find interesting is that I've heard a lot of people saying that, no, this needs to be single family and open space. And I was thinking to myself, what am I missing here? And, you know, as in my current position, I kind of step back from a lot of the planning day-to-day stuff because we hire planning people to do their thing and consultants, and I'm not going to micromanage. But when I took a closer look at this, this is something that concerns me from a planning standpoint and from a policy standpoint. You can see that all of the single family in this area, which are differing densities, Kingsbury Gage a much different size lot than on the hill, but they're called NP, which is neighborhood preservation. And that category is described in your master plan. And you can see that the easterly side of the River Ridge development is shown as NP. Which if you look at what zoning is allowed in the NP category, it's single family zoning. Okay, so now I'm starting to understand where we're getting at here. That the master plan is saying this should be single family here, and what really concerns me is the green striped area, which calls for a open space preservation overlay, but it's not defined. And I've heard different opinions on this, but I think the general feeling is that this was planned to just be open, left open space. Though that's what I'm hearing from the general public. And that's a little bit concerning to me too, because typically you don't want to show private property as open space for a variety of legal issues, including takings and those kind of things. So because it's not defined, that's a little bit uncomfortable for me. which leads me back to the original reason for the moratorium, which was to look at a couple of sites in town, and this is certainly one of them, and go back into where maybe the master plan needs a little bit more definition, and maybe a review again, that maybe we missed some things. And that was really the reason for the moratorium, was to let us step back and look at this because of the findings of fact that are in your zoning code. So what happened was the developer lowered the density on this project, which is fine. But then that got them out of the moratorium's catch, which is 3.5 units per acre and more. So they lowered the density, got under that, and then they were eligible for additional review. The decision point, I think, for you folks is, and this is completely up to you, I'm just stating my professional opinion, but is this something that we just need to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got some conflicting things going on in this master plan. The site is zoned RPUD2, which allows for multifamily development, so that's certainly a major consideration here. What concerns me is the current master plan may not match with the current site plan. It certainly matches with the old master plan, and you could go all the way back to the 98 plan, and you could see that this was shown as MDR, which is medium density residential, and is generally shown as 4 to 8 units per acre. These folks meet that without a problem, but we adopted a new plan in 2020. So there's some timing things here, there's some definitions and clarifications. So from my standpoint, I think it would be wise to table this and go back and do what we said we were going to do, which was do a public process to review the master plan for this site and this general area. So that's my 2 cents. Paula has a different recommendation, and you folks can choose one, both, neither. I think Paula set you up with model motions to do what you need to do here tonight. So I will get out of the way. I know Scott has a report as well, and I'm more than willing to discuss further, but those are my comments for now. Thanks.
Commissioners, any questions? Frank has raised some points here referencing recommendation from Paula and contrasting viewpoint from Frank. Any reaction to that along the way? Just to get things started, from my standpoint, I looked at the memo that was provided by the consultant in terms of analysis, so that's how it fit with the master plan. And my impression is that he was looking at it more as it applies to zoning regulations, which are very specific, as opposed to a master plan, which is it's a lot of concepts as far as how you want to see the area in this part of the community develop. And so in terms of density and the type of housing, as I look at the master plan, I feel the townhouse development is responsive to that in both density in terms of how it's laid out on the property. The prior plan, I believe, involved clearing a larger part of the overall property in order to make it ready for the development. And it also, there are some steep slopes, I think, on the western part of the property that were going to be a casualty as well. And as I look at this, I think this compresses where the residential area is and where the development's going to take place, more to the western part of the site. Has a better opportunity perhaps to preserve the steep slopes that are there, and generally provide that transition between the residential on the northwest or the west part of the property, out to, Alpine Avenue, and, the eastern portion of the property that's, the homes along through that area. And it matches better, I think, with the apartments that are, the Greenridge apartments that are on the west side of the drive that goes through there. So, again, I think it's from my standpoint, that there is some semblance of conformance with the master plan in that respect.
Do we have to take the project off the table?
That's a very good point. Your motion?
I'll make a motion to take, I don't know, I've lost my computer.
Case number 23-028.
Case number 23-028. I'd like to take it, propose to take it off the table.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there support?
Yes.
Supported by Joe. Again, with a closed public hearing last time, Mark is raising a good point to be consistent with Robert Rules of Order. Take it off the table so we can continue the discussion. So all those in favor of taking that off the table indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign.
I can explain why.
Okay.
The previous motions we have to table it have specific things that were required of the applicant to come back and take it off the table, and they have not fulfilled that. There's quite a list of it. They know it. We know it. They have refused to do some of it. That's my reason for not wanting to.
Okay. Thank you. But the motion passes, and so we take it off the table. And again, any other discussion concerning the planning, the initial comments from Frank? If not, we'd move to the city engineer, Scott Connors. Okay, we'll move to Scott.
So we have a fairly short report. It talks a little bit about some concessions that were made, I think, the last time around, and what we would call maybe a settlement discussion at staff level. And I think our role at this point, in a project that's primarily zoning and planning related, has been to provide a little bit of collaboration and to try to address some of the comments from the neighborhood in plan revisions to help really collaborate, I suppose. And part of that, I think, is shown on the plans now in the fact that the cul-de-sacs have been shortened. They are now interior to the development, and that really has a dramatic positive impact on the 150-foot buffer zone where we're trying to reduce grading and tree removal. It also has impacted this southern detention pond by moving that further west. We think, again, that helps with the neighborhood. It helps move the impact further away from the homes. That's obviously a good thing. But at this point, in looking at this as a PASP, those are just positive steps for the Planning Commission to consider. But, I think we're really talking about zoning and planning. So we are here to help support any questions that you have as you move forward in those considerations. I'd also point you towards the previous reports that are shown from November 29th, a pretty extensive report, November 29th of 2023, which looks back to reports from January 24th of 2023 and then May of 2022. So really kind of combining 4 different reports that are formal with lots and lots of informal comments, informal site plan review interactions, and I think you're up here, Joe. And really combine all of that together, I think, when you consider the engineering side of this, and we're here to just help answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Again, commissioners, any comments or questions for Scott?
Scott, I have a concern about the south portion of the outlets to an unnamed local drain that bisects Greenridge neighborhood and is filtered through a natural wetland on the way to lower stretch of York Creek and the Grand River. Why is that an unnamed drain?
No one has taken enough interest in it to give it a name, I
So is it a
suppose.
drain?
Is it a county drain, that one?
It is not, no.
What's it consist of?
It's really a backyard water course that a neighborhood was built around, obviously with Greenridge and Springbrook neighborhood. It's fairly steep, a lot like the county drain to the north that we call the Alpine Walker Drain. It just hasn't been adopted as a county drain, making it what we would consider local. There's no easements in place or anything like that.
So,
With,
It does convey water from the areas to the west of Center Drive, which is the Greenridge apartments, which were built probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
so we're taking quite a number of units and we're dumping it into that drain basin and down through that gully that there's not a structure whatsoever or even a river or wetland. I mean, it's,
Well, I
you
would
take
say,
a 100-year storm and you dump it in there and what's gonna happen to the houses around it?
I would say we aren't doing that. There's a development that's proposed that would outlet that area, just like with Greenridge. They're private developments, and we have a standard ordinance that we're using to help review that.
So you're saying that people downstream have to develop it?
No, the developments are the ones that are proposing to put water there, not the city.
My question is, if it's not even a wetland or stream or anything like that, how can you put water through it? It should be designated as a York Creek or,
My guess is that it's considered a water of the state. If it's not and Jeff maybe can help us out on this, if it's not designated as some kind of a chapter X or Y county drain, then it's just considered a stream. I believe that's correct. Yeah, under the purview of Eagle then, not the Kent County Drain Commission. And that's how York Creek started too.
And it may not be considered a water of the state based on the tributary area that runs into it. We would still consider it a natural drainage course in terms of how we would address it within our zoning.
okay, how much can that natural water course handle? If we're approving to put half the water from that development through it, I have a real problem with that because we've already seen what happened to York Creek.
Yeah, I think your questions are better posed to the developer. You might want to interrogate them over that.
Okay. I just want answers.
I think that Frank brought up a good point about making sure that we look at our master plan and stuff. And something that, as the city commission, that was something that we specifically looked at as putting in that moratorium for that reasoning of the further clarification within our master plan. It's easy for us who have worked with it for a long time to know what we wanted to say, but clearly through this point, we didn't define exactly how we wanted it to be said. So through this moratorium and working on the master plan, this allows us as planning commission, city commission, and ZBA to create a plan that we wanted to spell out more directly. Allowing this project, I think, to sit on the table until we can work through our moratorium and working on fixing our master plan to the way that we want it to, allows us to really put into thought exactly what we want to see here. Because we all have ideas, and we all had the idea for putting that, for that open space and the neighborhood preservation, but we didn't define it as well as we should have, in my opinion.
Scott, in your information, you've talked about collaboration with the partners surrounding. You've got Alpine Township, although I think as it goes out to the Grand River, that's all City of Walker area there. But are there other partners that are involved with it? The Drain Commission, correct?
Yeah, to the north, I think our other regional partners include Alpine Township, Plainfield Township, and the Drain Office. And if you get into, who makes up the drain district for the Drain Office, it even brings in Kent County Road Commission and MDOT. So we have a lot of partners to work with on the north end. We've made commitments to them that if this was to move forward, we would need to work on some very detailed improvements in the FASP. And I think we've talked about some things about regional detention, and I would really lobby for that. Now I do think the developer was open to those discussions, but we're not quite to that point yet if we're still talking about kind of land use and density.
Okay. So there are some factors there that come into play in terms of how much of it needs to be done now and how much of it is between the FASP and the preliminary area site plan in terms of pinning that down.
Yeah, I think my interpretation of that would be that the Planning Commission has a pretty substantial amount of discretion for how much they can ask for up front. So it gives you the ability to ask for a lot more if you think it's critical, or to defer some of that to future detailed design and again those negotiations with our neighbors.
Well, that's a part that a couple summers ago when we had a large group of people, the applicant, a number of people with their team, neighbors that live in the area, city staff, as well as Planning Commission, walked the site. And one of the impressions I came away with that was a bit overwhelming was the northwest part of the property. There's significant erosion that's taking place along through there, and it was a kind of a signal that whatever happens on this property, there's got to be some advancement of dealing with that issue. And I was encouraged as we've gone through this process with the development group, where there seemed to be a recognition of the importance of that and working together, not only with the city, but the other partners in this area. So I think that's a common ground, and it's just a matter of when you get that detail pinned down. I think with the recent, there's been more renewed discussion amongst the partners as of late, and hopefully that'll get some momentum as we go forward.
Yeah, maybe to help as a way of background, since we have a little bit of a new makeup for the Planning Commission, it's probably worth pointing out that since the initial public comment and gathering all of those concerns from Walker residents and Alpine Township residents, I think the Timber Creek condominium folks came in with some concerns. Since that time, the Drain Office has implemented pretty significant improvement to the existing water course in the Alpine Walker Drain. And that improvement has included some revetments and shoring up of those slopes. The people that paid for that are the City of Walker and Alpine Township as part of Kent County Drain Commission's assessment of that charge. I believe it's like 64% to Walker, and the rest of that is mostly Alpine Township, partly to MDOT, partly to the Road Commission. And so that's part of the culmination of those public comments.
Okay.
And the developer hasn't paid for any of that. It's been burdened with the governmental agencies.
So I think between that area to the northwest and that drainage area going to the southeast, those are significant issues to deal with on this particular property then. So, any other comments or questions?
I've
for
always
city
been
engineer?
impressed with, Scott's been here for a long time, and he knows this water, and the water's the biggest problem we have. And I'm always impressed, and I go with a lot of what he says.
You know, it's kind of cool to have Frank with us here tonight too, because when I met Frank, he was the coordinator for the Friends of you can describe it better, but the Alpine Walker drain in the York Creek.
As usual, he's totally incorrect. It's, sorry about that, but it's true. I worked for Water Resources Institute at Grand Valley State, and I was the York Creek project manager. It was a Section 319 of the Clean Water Act, Watershed Management Grant. And, you know, I hate to date myself here, but that started in the early 90s. I took it on in the mid-90s to the late 90s. And Scott and I worked together to build a stormwater ordinance for Kent County. Because prior to that, we didn't have a stormwater ordinance. Stormwater was kind of the third utility that nobody talked about. Well, in this case, that Alpine Walker drain takes all of the water off of Alpine Avenue. And the next time you go out there, you can see the big dip in the road that goes back up to 4 Mile. And just imagine all that water volume coming off of roofs and M37 and going to one pipe. So over time, that Alpine Walker drain went from a step-over stream to now, in places, it's probably 30 feet wide. And all the erosion's gone along with it. And it's going to be an issue forever. In a major urban area, it would probably be put in a pipe. And so would York Creek. And over time, York Creek, the floodplain expanded because of the stormwater being added, both from the Alpine side and the Walker side. And I remember Roger Lanninga, drain commission from several versions ago, and we had to use FEMA dollars to buy homes in Alpine Township because they were getting flooded by York Creek, cutting its new floodplain. So again, there's a history of stormwater management here that's really foundational to the Grand Rapids region. And I just think that we somehow that needs to be very carefully studied. And I'm particularly concerned with the middle water course, which is this one, if you can see the line, which is currently probably an intermittent stream that goes between all these homes and goes downhill. It's the Alpine Walker drain. Now let's be all over again, except for what's the water generating that stormwater. Alpine Walker drain was getting that big flush from Alpine Avenue. That's not going to happen here. This is from one development with modern stormwater standards, so the situation is much better. I think from my standpoint, I'm just concerned that we don't avoid carefully studying this water course to make sure that we don't impact those homes downstream. This hill is full of water. That's why it's highly erodible. It's maybe not an end moraine, but it is the end of a moraine, glacial moraine, because when you get to this part, this is all Grand River 500-year floodplain, and it's flat. And then you go straight uphill. And this hill is all full of water. So you put all those together, and that's what we see at the northern end of this site, which is stormwater jetting out of a large pipe, and it's torn its way down to Alpine Walker drain. So I'm just, I guess my comment is, do you handle that at the master plan level? I think we could incorporate that to make sure that we're setting standards to be followed up by whoever owns and develops this property relative to this downstream. So that's another thing that I generated a list for things that we may want to cover in the master plan update for this site and other sites. And that's one of them, and I think that's pretty significant. That's enough from me.
All right, any other questions for engineering? At this point, go to the applicant. If you come forward, please. Introduce yourself and kind of bring us up to date with the latest plan that's been submitted.
Well, I think you know me by now. My name's Pat Lennon, and I will say after Mr. Wash's comments, my head is still spinning a bit. I find that this new position that was unveiled tonight without any notice to us is beyond shocking. There is an official report that the staff circulated last week that we've been relying on until the very moment he began speaking. So I will say that to begin my comments, I find this new twist in the position of the staff to be troubling. Had we had notice, we would have an opportunity to really address potentially some of these ideas that have come up. But to say we didn't get notice is one of the most incredible things to even begin to say, because none of these issues with respect to the master plan and this new interpretation were ever mentioned. And I will remind you that this project has been before you for nearly 2 years. We have been to 3 public hearings. This is our 4th time addressing you, and this is brand new. The charge to the staff and what was decided by this planning commission in the December meeting was that it would be referred to the McKenna, I believe is your consultant, for to consider the modifications we made to the preliminary plan, which were accommodations to the city and to the community, to see how they aligned with the original memo. This analysis throws the original memo out the window and starts a whole anew. And by the way, all we ever asked for at the last hearing was a decision. And we would like a decision tonight, yes or no. Tabling into infinity is no longer acceptable to us. This notion that we are now going to effectively table us into the moratorium, which is what I hear being discussed among the Planning Commission, is simply unacceptable and is on legally thin ice. And I'm sorry if I'm a little irritated tonight, but we have spent a lot of time reacting to comments and effectively playing a game of whack-a-mole. Every time we solve one problem, another one is presented. And we want these positions on the record. We want them before you, and we would like a decision tonight, because we know, and we have demonstrated, that our project complies with the ordinance. Not only with the original way we interpreted it, but with all of the machinations of it that have been put upon our client. And we are quite proud of our client for having the patience to work the way they have with the city, with the neighbors, and with the community. And I will ask you this, we get it. We know the neighbors don't want the project. We know you're under a lot of pressure. We understand it. But I will say this, in their heart of hearts, and in your heart of hearts, everyone must know that this is a by right project, that the version of the plan before you tonight is far superior for them, for you, not for our client, but for everyone else than the original draft. And I will say this too, it's not as though this, I believe some may hope this property won't be developed, but that is not reality. You know, the ordinance permits development. The master plan contemplates development. It does not contemplate it as open space that can't be used. And if you want to take that position, we can talk about that too. But in any case, those are my reactions to what I'm hearing tonight. Disappointment is an understatement, and we just want you to vote. And we believe that our project, and you've seen the letters that we submitted today, I assume those are in the record? Okay. We believe that even with the imposition of these master plan requirements that have been put upon us, which we disagreed with in the first place, but we attempted and explained why we think that we comply. Even with that, we believe that we comply and we are entitled to an approval. And we hope you'll give that to us tonight. If we do, we can assure you we will honor our commitments. We will build the project the way we have promised. We will be good neighbors and continue to be good community citizens.
Thank you. And I'm hopeful that you're coming forward to kind of highlight the plan and how it's reflects changes and improvements.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair. So my name is Suzanne Schultz. I'm with Progressive AE. I also, for 20 years, worked for the city of Grand Rapids, 14 of those as the planning director. And I think there's a couple important things to know about this project and to think about, especially from a best practice standpoint. It concerns me that we're convoluting the master plan and the zoning ordinance, as the master plan is a regulatory document. The master plan is a policy document that guides future land use, that provides a long-term vision over 20 years about what is supposed to happen in the community. The zoning ordinance is law. That's the ordinance that commissions adopted. So that is the regulations that we're supposed to follow. The comments about what the master plan requires for density, or what the master plan says for environmental conditions, those are all policy components. They're not regulatory. They're not ordinance. It hasn't been adopted as an ordinance by the commission. So I think there's some confusion when we say, well, we'll evaluate the master plan and we'll put that in the master plan. If there's that many concerns about it, then you're looking in the wrong place and you haven't properly applied a policy document versus a regulatory document. So I think that first part needs to be really kind of clearly made, that when we look at this project, and I can talk about the master plan compliance because that's become an issue, so I'm prepared to address that. But before we get to that, I do want to show, right now the zoning is RPUD2. It's been talked about being multifamily. We're not proposing, it depends on, there's communities that describe multifamily in different ways. What we're describing are, some people would say attached single family, row houses, townhouses, depending on the language you want to use, no higher than any of the single family residential directly adjacent to it. And in fact, it goes substantially different from the apartments, which are 3 stories, 12 units to the acre. We're going to 3.4 units to the acre if you use gross density, to the net density to the neighbors, which are single family. So it's a pretty dramatic drop to go from 12 units to the acre to 3.4 to the neighbors. And the zoning is already in place. So what that means is, and why we're here, we're not here for rezoning. And if you're here for a rezoning, when you usually look at the rezoning, that's when you defer to the master plan, because the master plan is going to tell you what that future vision is, and you're regulating towards that. So it's, does the master plan envision this happening in the future? And if I'm doing a rezoning, how does that connect with that future vision? Right? It's not, this is what the master plan says and this is what the zoning ordinance says and we don't know what to do. It's the zoning ordinance is what the rules you're following. So we know it's zoned master, is zoned multifamily. It's been zoned PUD like that for 34 years. We've been implementing that master plan and that future land use, the PUD for 34 years. In fact, there's a hotel that was just built in 2021, and there's hotels planned for that edge facing the freeway. So this plan has been continually being in progress for the past 34 years. And so the plan, the PASP, is a site plan approval. It's not a rezoning approval. So the site plan approval is to look at the criteria that you have in the zoning ordinance and to say, how do those things work? And so when we look at those things, I think there's a couple important components, and we'll get into the conditions of approval because that was mentioned. But in the PASP criteria, I think it's really important that you're saying the preliminary site plan requirements, the word general is used 8 times and approximate is used 3 times. The level of detail, and this is where there's concern about how much do we provide in supplying information on this project and how many times has it been provided, including detailed grading plans, detailed utility plans. This is preliminary. It's to decide if this is even feasible, if it's even possible for this to get approved, and you get general approval and consensus from you as to this is the site plan that generally is okay, knowing we still have to come back to the Planning Commission for final site plan approval. There's no point in doing due diligence, in doing $30,000 in hydrological studies, doing all of those components if we don't even know if the site plan as laid out is even acceptable to you. What's the point in preliminary if everything's now required to be final information and to continuously do that? There's no point in doing that. The due diligence period, there's one period where you have general information. Do we think it can work? Generally, does grading work? Has it met those requirements? So we talked to the Kent County Drain Commissioner. We've provided information to the engineer. Both have said it's adequate for now to discuss stormwater. What we submitted now, knowing that there's going to be additional study required to even get to final, and that the Planning Commission still has purview over final. But the information that's provided today for preliminary is feasible, knowing we have to do additional work. But there's no point in doing additional work if we don't even know if what's been laid out and proposed is even possible. It doesn't make any sense, because then why would you have preliminary versus final? So when we talk about the master plan, and I'll go back to this, there's a theory in planning, right? So ideally, that's really how it's constructed, and even your zoning shows. You go from the highest intensity use, long alpine, You're going to the multifamily residential, those 3-story, 12 units to the acre apartment buildings, and then you have the site for the developer, and then the single family. So this is very classic transition of uses from most intense to least intense, providing that buffer. And again, what we're proposing is the same height as the single family residential. When we talk about environmental features, and I would agree with the chair when he talks about the level of detail in the latest consultant master plan discussion about what grading is here and what grading is there, that's a whole different ball of wax than a master plan discussion. But in this case, when we talk about the overall idea of environmental preservation and sensitivity, this site plan has tried to avoid all the wetlands, all the steep slopes, all of the heavily forested areas that are on the site. Keeping in mind that this is a former golf course. So it's not like the whole site was always wooded and it's all high quality trees. You've got pioneer species that were there because they've only grown in the past 20 years. So those areas where we are showing the bulk of the development are areas where those were already disturbed locations. There was already golf course there. There are some exceptions to that, but we've proposed, in part of the reason for the tree canopy discussion, was to say we're making an assumption that those were high quality trees, and we're proposing to replace those trees and look at from a tree canopy perspective. As was mentioned, the number of iterations that we've gone through, this is the original PUD that was approved, and it shows the location of the units and how it was clustered. Interestingly enough, this would have been much more impactful than what we're proposing in this development, in the site plan, sorry, that we have, especially when you look at the north end, that York Creek area that everybody's concerned about. The number of units that they were proposing up there is substantially different than what we're proposing today. Since 2022, we've been proposing plans and brought that to the Planning Commission for additional discussion. Keeping in mind, even if we're tying this back to the master plan, at this point, your master plan was only 2 years old, right? So this hasn't been like the master plan was adopted 15 years ago and we need to reconsider. You're talking 24 months, like a toddler, right? So this is not, I mean, it's not like all of a sudden the master plan is so far out of date. If there was an issue with the master plan, we're trying to follow those things. A 2-year-old master plan is not an old master plan. And now we're 2 years from that, and you're still working on what does the master plan mean. It's really not fair for the developer to be going along, having an approved zoning. We already have the zoning. We're just asking for a site plan, and we're wrapped up into this master plan discussion. We've made substantial changes. This was the revision. We went from this ring road idea and homes facing, or the units facing the homes. The elevation is really important to understand on this site, is that most of the homes on Sunnybrook and in that area sit higher than the units that we're proposing in this development. So we're sitting lower than the homes. It's not like they're perched and are looking down on the neighbors. They're lower than the neighbors. And we've made additional changes, as the city engineer has already discussed, pulling everything out of the 150-foot buffer area, providing those gaps in between for neighbors. We're certainly amenable to trying to pull it even further out. As you know, there was a discussion by the consultant about that 50 feet frontage. But again, given the difficulties we've had with this project, and this idea of, well, you can negotiate with the Planning Commission and go ask for something else, why would we do that if we can't even get to the point of a preliminary approval? Like, it doesn't make sense to start asking you for exceptions when we can't even get to the point of a preliminary approval. The plan that was provided is an example of master plan compliance by the consultant in earlier versions is infeasible. We talk about trying to keep along North Center Drive, and we talk about focusing the development. The development that they're proposing, and actually was shown in the master plan, is where Frank identified as this area is to be preserved. Those are the areas that are of greatest impact if we show for development where that's supposed to happen. So they were showing the area in the master plan closest to the neighbors to be preserved, and areas of development towards North Center Drive. In this case, if you look at the green box that the consultant had identified, that's almost practically the only buildable area on the site. If we look at to the north and we look at to the south and we look at where you have your steep slopes and wetlands, and we have an entire kind of infrastructure, public utility easements running through the site. That's it. So we're being told exactly the opposite. Go develop here when it's, by protect environmental areas, when you can't do both. You can't develop there and protect environmental areas. So that's the reason for the site plan, the design, the way it is. Stormwater and hydrology, we can discuss that, but the big headline here is the Drain Commission has studied this for 2 decades. Engineering's been involved. There's got to be additional study, but again, what's the point if we can't even get past a preliminary and we don't know if anything's acceptable to the city? Trees were mentioned as a concern, and so when we looked at where those areas were, so this is the former golf course. This is when it was a golf course, and the red area are where the trees were located. The rest, we had no trees because it was grass. And so we looked at that when the requirement or the request for tabling included looking at the caliper of the trees. Well, we know that every place where there isn't the red is less than 20 years old or 24 years old, depending on when you look at the thing. So there's no point in doing a whole tree canopy analysis, or I'm sorry, a tree survey looking for 12-inch trees when we know where they aren't going to be. And we can use other best practice methodologies to address tree canopy and high quality trees, which is what we did, and it's what we presented to staff in November. It was included in the presentation to you in December, and we presented that and discussed it. Because the whole goal is to make sure that we're presenting high quality trees, not kind of pioneer species. And so that was the reason why we proposed it the way we did. And the fact is that even if there were trees to be preserved on this site in the areas where we're proposing development, engineers will tell you, site grading people will tell you, foresters will tell you, the trees won't survive grading and development in those areas. You're better off clearing them and replanting when you're doing that work in an area of influence with development. So that's what we did. Endangered species was identified on the list. We asked staff, could we please have an example of a threatened and endangered species that another development has submitted as an example so we would know what this is supposed to look like? And to their knowledge, none has ever been required or submitted. So it's not the jurisdiction, you guys don't regulate, the local government doesn't regulate threatened and endangered species. And it's not required, and it's just not your jurisdiction. So that's why we didn't do a full analysis. We identified, what we were asked to do is identify potential species. Not saying if we find something that we're not gonna respect it or anything else, but it's just what's practical, again, for a preliminary site plan approval. And that's really, the level of detail is just beyond what you would normally require. So that's kind of the high level summary. But when we look at the conditions and we look, I think there was one more condition that was addressed I wanted to make sure I covered. The groundwater system evaluation, again, private wells. The project's served by public water, and so it's not gonna impact the groundwater in the wells. And even with the development, if there's concern, with stormwater requirements, we have to protect or provide retention as much on-site as possible. So if there's worries about groundwater recharge, we're trying to keep and contain as much stormwater as possible. In fact, what we proposed in the southern drain area, the retention area, was 20% larger than what's required to make sure that the stormwater is on site. Tree inventory, covered that. So I think I've covered the conditions that you talked about. And again, I go back to when we talk about the environmental regulations and what's envisioned, saying we'll address that in the master plan and put those rules in the master plan, you have to, the master plan is not a regulatory document, your zoning ordinance is. And so from a development perspective, it'd be very useful if there were more clear, predictable processes and rules, if those are the things. We even talked about the density that was just adopted. Those density rules, you can say we're gonna include steep slopes in looking at that for a density calculation. That doesn't mean steep slopes will be preserved. It's just part of a density calculation. So I think there's some confusion, but hopefully this helps clear that up. And we're happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? I
I read about a meeting was being held with the neighbors. I didn't hear the results of that. I understand that was done, though.
That's correct.
So the applicant had held a meeting, well, before I got involved, but we wanted to make sure with the redesign that was done, that the neighbors had another opportunity to review the plan because it was such a substantial change than what they had seen before. So on November, it was 28th or 29th, we held that meeting so neighbors could review that. And we had engineers on staff that could answer any questions. We had about 50 people in attendance.
And I would just add that before Progressive got involved, there was also a property tour that we hosted, where we took neighbors around and showed them, and the staff.
Tyler?
I want to get some clarification on your compliance with master plan. Number one, note the applicant has made and continues to urge its legal argument that compliance with the city's general development plan is not a proper consideration when the use is permitted under the ordinance. Can you refer us to the city's general development plan, please?
Well, yeah, I think that was our point, and this has been discussed among the lawyers.
Okay, so you're saying you can't?
Well, no, I'm saying that there isn't one. You know, what
Then
we're
we would
reserving our
probably,
argument.
most people would probably consider the master plan the plan?
Jeff?
Jeff?
I don't need an answer, it's fine.
No. Jeff?
Well, Mr. Lennon and I disagree on this point.
Yeah.
There is reference in the zoning ordinance that one of the things the planning commission is to look to is whether the plan that's in front of you is in compliance with the general development plan. Question, what's the general development plan, since we nowadays call it a master plan. If you look at the 2020, I believe it's the 2020 master plan, there's a history of other master plans that have preceded it. In fact, the 1986, whatever, is identified as the general development plan for the city. So at least at some point in time, the city equated its master plan with the term general development plan. Now, again, I understand Mr. Lennon doesn't agree with that, but I think that's a reasonable position to take, and it makes sense, in my opinion, because I don't know otherwise what general development plan could mean.
And importantly, just to tack on to what Mr. Sluggett said, we've been arguing we comply with the requirement anyway, but we just reserve that position in case the general development plan is something else, because no one was able to draw that connection to us
Okay.
before. Thank you.
Just one more thing, I think, I'm not gonna go into much more, lots of things have been said here previously. To be told that we didn't talk about water and downstream is, I think, an error. June 1st, 2022, I made a motion to table, and part of 2B was an overall stormwater impact analysis must be conducted. Part C, an analysis must be conducted by the Kent County Drain Commission as it pertains to impacts on the county drains and subject property and downstream. And more work needs to be done and a wetland delineation. Then in June of 2023, the Planning Commission needs significantly more hydrology and hydraulic information regarding the following, those same things. So to say that we didn't talk about that, or that it wasn't part of our argument, I think is a little bit in error.
Well, I think our position is what we've done is sufficient to comply with the ordinance for purposes of the preliminary approval, because I believe Suzanne can speak to this more specifically, obtained from, I believe, the drain commissioner and the city engineer, and I mean, why don't you answer this? Because I know you've been working with the experts in this area, but we have investigated that and believe that we had sufficiently addressed it, but I'll let her speak to the specifics. Thanks.
Well, I just would really defer to the conversation you just recently had with the engineer who said, we're looking at those opportunities for partnerships with the Drain Commission. Applicant is open to that and looking at remedies for York Creek and looking at the north end of that. And we've had those conversations. We're open to that, and that's where we've been told, and it's in the minutes by the engineer in multiple meetings, that what we've submitted is sufficient for preliminary plan approval, knowing there's gonna have to be additional study.
Well, many times I've disagreed with our city engineer, And again, I'll ask you what I asked him. On the southern part of the property, where does the water go?
It's shown in the.
Yeah,
in the
what
plan.
stream, what's the name of it? What watershed, what? It's just going down a gully as far as I can tell from out there. Is that correct?
I'm not an engineer, so I cannot answer
Have
that
you
question.
looked out there at it?
I-
I'm not an engineer, but I saw a
seen,
gully.
I've seen pictures, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm asking, where's the water going from the south? I think that's a very important question. And it's part of knowing in the preliminary site plan, I downloaded the section 94-213 and read it. There's a lot of times it refers to the city's plan, the city's development plan, and a lot of times it refers to water and everything. I just think that's the preliminary site plan that it's referring to. So to say that we have to wait to figure out the water till later, especially in in this current situation of a very unstable area, I don't agree. So I don't have to agree with the city engineer. We're here to make a decision. So you can say that all you want, but I think there's a huge issue here with water. Believe me, I'm not against your project. It's by right. I said that at the very first meeting. We just need answers on certain things. So, thank you.
If I may, in terms of the development plan, they are showing stormwater detention on the property. And if I'm getting out of my lane here, let me know, Scott. But it's a case there where they have a prescribed size that they have to have there. So that when you have a rain event, the water is gathered there, and then there's a release on it that comes out into play. In this case, that release, especially for the southern one, is going to go to the southeast. And so there are things they can do and the release rate for that detention that would help deal with that issue.
I
But
understand all that, but it still has to be released, and there is not a known waterway. It's going down a hill. I mean, that's just, the fact you can go out there and look at it, it's just going down a hill.
Just to kind of put a end to that, so those things would be looked at as part of the final area site plan. That would be finally addressed by the engineer. Now, unfortunately, we don't have our engineer with us tonight, but that is, and we believe we were gonna be discussing more of the master plan aspects, but that is something that would be addressed, and obviously the final area site plan couldn't be approved unless those questions are answered.
I agree. It's just, this is such a unstable area. It just is astounding to me that not more people are concerned about that. So that's it.
But we're concerned about it, and it's up to us to keep our water on our site, and rest assured we will.
As taking over for Commissioner Gilbert on this, I know I've been out of the discussion for quite a few times, so I apologize if I repeat any of these questions, but I just had a few questions going forward. I think that you just noted that we were planning on being here tonight to discuss the master plan, and in Book 2A, it indicates where we talk about the future land use in our community map. So that's not something new that we haven't looked at. I think that was also noted in the McKenna memo too, that the point that Frank brought up is not something new, but something that's in the books that you thought that we were gonna be discussing tonight. So that's kind of alarming to me that the master plan that we were gonna be discussing tonight, you weren't even prepared for, in that sense that the plan is laid out right there in Book 2A. Something else that I wanted to note too is you said that we weren't allowing development here. We don't own the property. We can't decide if we develop it or not. We're trying to make sure that this development aligns with all of our plans. I thought image that you shared, Suzanne, too, not sure if we have that up still or not, Frank, but you showed the image of where we were going from higher density down to lower density, and you put a line right in there, right, that aligns with our community map about the discussion about where we're at the open green space, as well as where we line up with the neighborhood preservation, right on that line. Yeah, sorry. Yep, right there. So pretty much on that line where we go from yellow to green there in the lower density, that's right along our line that's laid out in Book 2A, indicating where we're gonna go from open preservation down to neighborhood preservation. So seeing that map, it makes me think that, Suzanne, you've obviously looked at this map before, and we want to preserve that, and you know where that line is, but yet we're still encroaching onto that neighborhood preservation with these townhomes. The fourth thing I want to bring up is the tree canopy survey. That's not something new. We just had Lincoln Longs come through on a project, and they did an extensive tree survey out there. They made sure to save as many trees as we could, the largest trees that we could find in any trees. Saying that we aren't going to do that with a golf course, that used to be a golf course. This used to be a golf course. There's still reason to do that survey even without it. Because of the water retention, we could have a more than 12-inch tree, so I struggle with seeing the fact that we're not allowing this tree survey to be done prior to us with the preliminary so that we can save these and maintain these larger trees on the site rather than getting rid of the factors that we have to maintain the land use with these larger trees in the canopy. So looking at that is really hard for me to say, yes, this fits with this in that sense. That's everything I have.
So there is a 150-foot buffer that is required with the neighbors on the east side, so that line represents that buffer area on the transition map. The tree survey, I think that, you know, you look at what was there 20 years ago, and there weren't trees standing in most of those.
Chair, can you make sure that we have the audience quiet during this time?
Okay.
So the area that's shown where there were trees or not was Google Earth from 1999.
I'm just saying that we had the same thing with a golf course, and we were able to maintain a lot of the trees by working around these trees, and I think that that's something that we really need to look at in order so we can keep that preservation with that. Not just a Google image isn't going to give that to you. You have to go out there and measure those trees, just like what we did with Lincoln Lawns, and making sure that we do preserve those and move buildings and stuff so we can keep those features there.
So the heaviest wooded areas are going to remain untouched, both on the north and the south side of the site. And so that is where, when we had prior comments from the Planning Commission about trying to preserve existing tree stands, that's the area where we focused, knowing that's where the oldest trees were.
So on your map that you showed, there was a section in the middle we're taking out of that section, that's what you're saying?
So that section in the middle is where the pioneer species are, where it was golf course, according, you know, with the historical imagery. And so that's the area that we are going to disturb. As we mentioned, that's the only developable area given what's on the north and south ends. And so we know that area is going to be disturbed.
Okay, thank you. I think that just from reading through all these past comments and all the items that have been brought up by the Planning Commission throughout all these meetings and stuff with it, I just really struggle trying to know, based on the memo from McKenna relating that we don't line up with our master plan in that sense, and that we really struggle with making sure that you do follow through on the tabling items. As Tyler brought up, that a lot of these tabled items have not been addressed, and I think that that's alarming to us that we've been working on this for the last year and a half, and we still struggle with the follow through on that aspect.
What is your perception of the 150-foot area? Is it do not disturb? Is it graded and landscaped? This is me being ignorant. I don't know. I don't think we've talked about it.
Well, it emanates from the consent judgment.
Yeah.
And what that says is no structures. So, you know, to us, that's what that means. Now, what we've done in response to comments and efforts to accommodate everyone's interests is we've shifted all kinds of things out of there. I think the only thing we intend to do in there now is some grading.
Well, I mean, is it going to be graded, or is it?
I believe
is it a no-touch zone, or is it something you can't build in? I mean, I'm just looking for clarity.
It's a buffer, yeah. It's going to be an area where there's no buildings. We recall that the cul-de-sacs were going into it, and we would argue that those weren't necessarily structures, but we moved those out.
I was just curious. So.
Yeah, and that was a concession that, you know, we were glad to do, as with many others. And as you consider some of these things, consider an approval with some conditions, even though we may not think they're perfect. We'll consider what's presented.
Going back to that point, it's really hard for me to look at doing approval with conditions if we gave you how many different items to look at during the tabling, and you can't even follow through on those ones, but yet you want us to
Can
give
I
us an
disagree with
approval
that
on the,
briefly? I mean-
with the conditions on that.
Well, I think I want to respectfully disagree with that position because we believe we addressed them. I mean, these issues were not discussed. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're welcome to the planning commission. At the December meeting, those issues were not raised. We were through the discussion, and in prior meetings with the city, those issues were seemingly satisfied because there were reasonable solutions, like to the tree cover analysis and to endangered species and some of the others. So in our view, those boxes were checked. And so now it's back and we're addressing them, but please don't say we were leaving things undone because that was not the case.
Okay, at this point, again, we wanted to have conversation, ability for the planning commissioners to discuss what has been reviewed and offered this evening. Now, the public hearing was closed, and there's been a question of whether or not there's going to be allowance for additional public discussion. And I think if there's going to be some taking additional comments, it would be specific to the conversation we've had concerning the plan that's before us right now. The initial plan that you came in with, I believe is 186 units. This is 162. And so if we're going to allow for public comment, I think what we'd want to do is restrict it to that narrow focus.
And the master plan changes, or summary.
And again, yes, you're right, the master plan summary that, where we asked the consultant to take a look at the plan and compare it to the master plan goals and vision. So I looked, Jeff.
Sorry to interrupt. I think at some point it would be worth mentioning to the public and for the applicant, the documentation that has been received by the planning commission since the public hearing was closed. I know that we've received 2 letters, I believe, from Mr. Lennon, a letter from Ms. Schultz, maybe 2, I think 1 I know for certain. I know there were letters sent to planning commissioners by members of the public that have been distributed.
Vanderclock was one of them.
Mr. Vanderclock, and there was another one from the neighborhood association or something, Greenridge neighbors, something like that. I don't know if there were any others, but just, I think everybody needs to understand there has been a substantial amount of additional information that the planning commission has received already. So, just FYI.
So I guess I'm looking consensus of our planning commission here. Do you think there'd be merit to, with that narrow focus, to take additional comment this evening? We'd be limited to no more than 3 minutes per speaker, and nobody coming back up to repeat again, and just have that opportunity.
I think that's a very good idea. These people sat here and been very, very kind, very, very nice about it, yes.
Are we okay with that then, as a group? Okay. All right, with those parameters.
Do we need to open a public hearing for that?
No, it's, in this case, it's a courtesy, so to speak, from the planning commission to allow for that comment, since there has been that change. And again, keep it within that focus, and Tyler's very good about keeping track of how much time you have, so be prudent with your, what you want to say, to be able to say that within the 3 minutes, please. So with that, if someone want to come forward, give us your name and address, and a very concise on the change in the plan from 186 to 162, and that report on the master plan compliance.
Hello again, I'm Linda Altmeyer, 400 Dakota Drive Northwest, and welcome to the new members of the commission. Thank you for taking these seats and serving the citizens of Walker. The neighborhood preservation category, as someone has pointed out already tonight, says that undeveloped land should be developed with similar character and density to the surrounding homes. Some say that River Ridge townhomes meet that description in transitioning from multifamily apartments to the west to our own single-family homes. Naming the proposed structures townhomes might conjure an upscale image, but that's a mischaracterization by the developer's own acknowledgement verbally here and in documents. These buildings will be two-story rental apartments built to resemble townhomes. They will have little in common in density or character with our old established neighborhood of single-family homes on large lots. In Phase 3 especially, this proposal will have the most profound impact to homeowners on Upper Greenridge and Dakota Drive. Because of the varying elevation and the topography, it's not possible to provide homeowners with an effective buffer zone. Our homes will sit higher than the proposed structures. We will have an up-close view of the apartments and vice versa. We will lose the privacy of enjoying our property. We will experience the full effect of noise, lighting, traffic, odor, and other nuisance from the apartments. Zoning and master plan language calls for protecting property values. This development will surely undermine ours. Mr. Wash and Mr. Connors have repeatedly warned of the problematic history of the northern water course, where Alpine Walker Drain begins its extreme downhill run through Phase 3 on its 66-foot fall to 4 Mile and York Creek. We can assume that the proposed development won't improve that water course, but may add to its problems. For those of us who live here, we have observed and can testify to the erosion, tree loss, and other impacts the water has caused. For these issues, plus incompatibility with the master plan and its vision for the city, Phase 3 could stand alone as reason to deny this PASP. Jade Pig and CWD care about a good return for their investors. We care about the character and quality of life in our neighborhood and the future of our city. If there was ever time to say no to a proposal, this is that time. Thank you.
As comments are offered, we can dispense with the clapping. It's just a matter of giving people a chance to talk. If we continue to get a clapping, we'll just close down taking additional comment. So please respect that as we move forward. Sir.
Bill Allen, 345 Dakota Drive, Northwest. As Frank alluded to at the beginning, the purpose of the moratorium was to give the city a chance to review the master plan. As Suzanne had said herself, this is not a new master plan, or this is not an old master plan that needs to be reviewed. It is relatively new, 2020. So a huge part of that 2020 master plan was changing the city from a character and identity of a whole into neighborhood clusters. And reading from the master plan, each of the 4 neighborhood clusters should have a heart. In South Walker, the heart is Millennium Park. In Standale, Community Park is the heart and should be the enhanced Standale course centered on the corner of Lake Michigan Drive and Cummings Avenue. In the Northwest, the Civic Center is the heart and should continue to be enhanced and improved. In Alpine, a new heart should be created in the redeveloped Greenridge Square. The master plan identifies this property as developing the new heart for the Alpine cluster. This development does not make this a heart to the community. It makes it a transition from high-density housing to neighborhood housing. It looks at the zoning aspect only. They can't see the forest for the trees. They're looking at what they can do, but the forest, the master plan, is how do we use this to develop a community heart for the Alpine sector. That heart is best served in the other sectors by Millennium Park, by the Standale Community Park, by the Civic Center here. Alpine needs such a center. And this statement in the master plan should be sufficient to deny this development, because for the master plan to incorporate a heart in the Alpine corridor by redeveloping the Greenridge Square plan. This has to remain open space and become community property or developed in a way that makes it a heart of the neighborhood, not just housing. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ian Bresky, and I'm at 3239 Springbrook. And if you could zoom in on the map, the south, on the just to the bottom of the retention pond. Tyler and Frank both talked about this area. That's my property there, and that stream you're talking about that they want to divert the stormwater into, that's my pond and my stream there, and that also continues underneath Springbrook and goes around behind the houses along Springbrook there. So I can attest that between my house and that stream is very wet, even walking around at any time. But I am concerned that we're taking, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul by moving it to my stream in my area when we haven't studied it, because it is very wet, it is wetlands, and it goes right into my pond. What's gonna happen when that, they say it's a 200-year storm, but it is just a guess. It is, the expert's best guess, but how many times have we seen that, we see new weather events all the time that we just can't guess on. It is just their best guess. So I just don't want to take that risk and lose or damage my property because, well, the experts said it was okay, but we don't really know. And that area is very wet and very unstable. So I just wanted to bring that up, and I would like to, propose that be Trina Creek, Trena, Trina Creek and Trina Pond, if we need to name it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Amy Hall, and I live at 363 Greenridge Drive, so our house is the very last house on Greenridge in the subdivision, and we moved here a year ago from New Mexico. And you would think a Michigander who is coming back would be a little crazy to do so in the middle of January, but we have a grandbaby, so we're here. And one of the drawing cards to coming back was the character of the neighborhood and our home. And the two things that I was under the understanding that we were going to talk about tonight was compliance with the master plan, because that's how we left things in the December meeting. And certainly another issue that was raised to discuss was the water impacts for this development. The character and what I'm understanding in reliance to the master plan seem to be at odds for me as well. And here are the reasons why. We have, per the Kent County Parcel Viewer, an average lot in the Greenridge neighborhood of 1.2 acres or 0.81 units an acre. And then you compare that with 162 units and 35 buildings in 25 acres. That's a pretty drastic transition of what we're looking at. It is not at all gradual, and it doesn't keep in line with what's described in the master plan according to the way I'm reading it for the neighborhood preservation areas that should be developed with a similar character and density to the surrounding homes. We wound through the streets of Greenridge and saw 100 custom homes built in harmony with the landscape surrounding them, spaciously wooded areas separating the homes, each home meticulously constructed to the highest standards of building at that time, designed to provide the maximum view of the old golf course and nature's beauty. And what we have developed in this plan is quite at odds. I don't see a transition happening there at all. The other thing that I had heard brought a couple times was how impactful it was for you to come and actually walk that land, especially when it was, discussing the erosion and so forth. And I listened to our neighbors provide QR codes and, things that they wanted you to be able to look at, and invitations to come in person to really see what it is that they see. And I would still put that out there as something that needs to be done before you even make a preliminary acceptance of what's happening. And to my knowledge, that hasn't happened. And I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Mike Vanderklock with 410 Dakota Drive, and my property actually abuts the Alpine Walker drain behind. And I would encourage, kind of a follow-up. Mr. Connors indicated the improvements that were done along that Alpine Walker drain. I'd encourage you to come and look, because I am on that and have looked at it. Certainly there was a small amount of rocks that were put in certain areas to help stabilize it, but certainly nothing that is going to have a tremendous impact or long-term make any difference. It needs a significant amount of work. And really the way to approach that is to petition the county for a full drainage assessment. And I think that's really what you're talking about here. I've spoken with Kent County. Kent County does not have authority and will not exert authority over that property. Kent County's authority is limited specifically to drains. And drains mean either established drains or tubes that pump water into that drain. They were very clear about that. That matches perfectly with the laws in the state of Michigan. So on the south side, Kent County has absolutely no authority, and I think you rightly indicated that. But also on the north side, they have no authority over what happens with water on that property unless you're going to pump it out through a tube. So that is the responsibility of the city of Walker to deal with that. I have a really hard time thinking, particularly on that north property. Right now it's a bowl. It's a bowl. It pretty much contains all its water. And on an MS4 drain, what you're required to do is achieve channel protection, which means the water does not leave. So you're talking about infiltration and evaporation only. So the whole concept of I'm going to put a pond in there with a tube in it goes right against the entire, in your own laws about the concept of channel protection. So I have a hard time figuring out how you're going to do that by building a hill in front of it and putting houses on top of it. I just think there's a lot of things that need to be looked at the pre-stage, because as I think the developer had mentioned, you're required to do your due diligence, and that phase is before you approve a PASP, because in the ordinances, your flexibility and ability to impact that is greatly reduced. You have large authority prior to approving the PASP. Once you get that PASP approved, the city is limited to only doing minor adjustments to that. There is a provision for amendments, but in the ordinances, the only person who can bring forth an amendment is the developer. The city does not have the authority to go ahead and do that. So you're really, once you go ahead and approve the PASP, you are saying that you have approved, and all, in particular, the drainage courses are okay. You have to specifically say that in your report. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mac Hall, and I live at 363 Greenridge Drive. I'd like to speak quickly on the meeting that was held between the developer and the neighborhood, and a quick rebuttal comment to one of the points that they made this evening. The developer has insisted that they have worked with the neighborhood to come to this current plan. Their PSP resubmittal paperwork for the December 6th hearing is dated November 28th. The meeting they held with the neighborhood took place on the evening of November 28th. I'm not sure how the developer could implement any feedback from the neighborhood if the paperwork was submitted before the neighborhood meeting had even taken place. They couldn't and didn't. This is a perfect example of the developer's unwillingness to work with the neighborhood. It just seems like it was to check to fill a box. And the rebuttal comment, they made the point tonight that some of the homes on Sunnybrook would be above the land where they're going to be building the apartments. We all know that the neighborhood is very hilly and windy, and so to cherry pick those particular homes that would be above, when I can cherry pick my own home and say that it will sit below the development going in, I just think that we have to kind of take that into consideration as well. Thank you.
If I may interrupt a minute, I'm going to be 87 next week, and I'm having trouble hearing some of you folks, so I'm sorry. Can you talk a little louder?
Sure. Mary Ann Ferris Young. I live at 3260 Springbrook, but I'll also state I grew up at 240 Greenridge, and my brother lives at 3261 Springbrook. So I have a lot of history on that hill. The wetness. My brother's house is the one directly adjacent to the southernmost retention pond. When we went to the meeting that was held about 6 weeks ago, my brother asked a specific question. You know, that sits in my backyard and it's already wet. And they said, we'll pump, unless he misunderstood, but they'll pump the water back out of the retention pond. Now, if it has a one-way flow that comes back down the hill to an excessively wet area, how do you back that back out? Additionally, and my dad and I disagree on this slightly, but the water that comes down Greenridge has expanded but exponentially since I've been a little child. So it takes out the road to his barn frequently, so it's been all, he's redone it all and kind of moved that water on his own. But just when Greenridge was a country club, we got a drizzle. When the developments came in, we got a wave. And as the rain continues and the impact continues, that water has changed dramatically and washes out his driveway. Additionally, about 10 years ago, I mean, we live on a hill. And the water that came in from the 100-year rain completely took out our basement. My brother didn't live there yet. And just as a reference, my brother has 3 sump pumps running continuously 24 hours a day in his basement, wired to a generator that turns on automatically to make sure nothing floods. And that's before any development is discussed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Robert Johns, and my wife and I live at 368 Dakota, Northwest. We've been there since 1996. Just wanted to touch on really 3 of what I still consider to be the unmet conditions. The issue of conducting a private well analysis was brought up in June and also again in February of 23, and it's because there's 100 of us approximately in the neighborhood that have well and septic systems, and we are very concerned about the impact that a project of this size is going to have on our well and septic systems. When I asked the developer at the neighborhood meeting on November 28th what the impact would be, the response was given, this project is using city water and therefore will not impact the wells in the area. This did not address the concerns about the unknown and unexpected impact on the well water quality and the septic systems when a project like this is put in on that spot. It was my impression that the developer was not planning, to conduct the well analysis, even though the Planning Commission had requested this at least twice. The second area of concern was identified as 2B, and that was about the overall stormwater impact analysis, and I think we've covered that quite a bit tonight. The third area is with regards to was identified as 2E, and that was with regards to the proper management of wetlands and the wetland delineation that was conducted by Peterson and Vandenberg Environmental in January was done when during the winter when the conditions were not right for the growing season. Even Eagle recommends that the analysis be done during the growing season. As the saying goes, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's impossible to get it back in. Thank you.
Logan Norton, 362 Dakota Drive. My question is, why are the retention bonds still well within the buffer zone? Upon reviewing the agenda packet, it would seem that the 1989 consent agreement is being acknowledged by the developer and partially enforced in the form of a 150-foot buffer zone line. The terms for the buffer zone in the agreement are clear. No buildings or other physical facilities, blah, blah, blah. We've read it before. So why isn't the Planning Commission getting ahead of this and simply handing these terms down as a requirement for approval? You have the full power and authority to enforce the same terms laid out in the agreement as a condition for approval, and this can be done completely separately from actually enforcing the 1989 agreement. You did this in 6-1, our first hearing, when you were tabling motion included the following condition: recognition of the 150-foot buffer prescribed by the 89 judgment, and remove all proposed storm detention areas from the buffer. The city of Walker will enforce the ordinance, but it cannot enforce the lawsuit. So again, why are the detention ponds still in the buffer zone when the developer's been clearly directed to remove them? The Planning Commission has an incredible amount of power to dictate requirements for approval during the PASP process. But once we're through to the FASP, the power and scope to dictate changes is greatly diminished. We've been reassured time and time again that the details will be ironed out with the FASP, but is there any what is the recourse if any of these studies come back below acceptable standards? Because conversations are not analysis. What if the well study shows a severe adverse impact on our wells and septic systems and 100 homes don't have water? What if the wetland designations by Eagle end up being much larger than the developer's analysis and require a new layout? What if the drainage issues pile up, create extensive erosion, and decimate the condos and the rest of the drain, which is located in Alpine Township? Could the Planning Commission enforce such the scale of changes needed to fix any of these major issues during the FASP? At the 2/1/23 hearing, the developer was to have completed the tabling conditions, or was ordered to have completed the tabling conditions before being scheduled for another public hearing. Yet, in the middle of a moratorium on large developments such as this, here we are. I don't care about the number of plan iterations that they've released. I care about the quality of the plan iterations that have been released. We need every single condition that was set upon the developer for approval met before the PASP approval, not after. Anything less is a recipe for disasters for the future owners of the development, surrounding neighbors, the environment, and the city of Walker. The Planning Commission report recommended that if the Planning Commission is to consider denial, it had better have specific points to support that decision, and I believe that we have and will continue to present the Planning Commission with ample evidence to support denial tonight. Thank you.
Okay, we appreciate your opportunity to, you're gonna, okay.
I'm Tom Altmeyer, 400 Dakota, and I want to thank the Planning Commission and the city staff for all their significant time and attention they put to this development proposal. This has been ongoing for more than a year and a half, almost 20 months now. The developer has failed to comply with some of the Planning Commission's list of must requirements as outlined in the June 1st, 2022 meeting. This ranges from total to partial non-compliance. Examples have been discussed tonight, and I will not repeat them. For the new planning commissioner members, starting here now in January of 2024, you have a long historical record that has been prepared for this development proposal. Flat diagrams do not justify the site topography. It's an amazing site. I encourage any commissioner that has not walked the site, when April comes around, take a look at it. Finally, I would like to talk to the audience to show quiet respect when the commissioners go about their discussions and their conclusions of what they have to do tonight. Once again, I would recommend that this action be tabled or denied, but not approved with conditions. Thank you.
Just one brief, I guess, last word. You know, in closing, it's our view that under any iteration or interpretation, the applicant has fulfilled the requirements of the ordinance. The city engineer and the county drain commissioner have said the stormwater analysis is sufficient for a PASP application. The planning director has recommended a PASP approval. It's been 2 years, 4 hearings, and 3 major revisions since this all began. Tonight, we must insist on a yes or no decision with respect to this application. We appreciate your consideration and look forward to further discussion.
So noted. All right, at this point, we'll go into deliberations. The way this is set up is that we don't go into another room and talk. We talk in the open discussion here. And so I'm going to look to our more experienced commissioners first as far as perspectives that you have on this particular project. Joe, if you lead it off.
By surprise a little bit. Well, I think this eventually is gonna get built a certain way, but maybe way the public wants it and we do too. But, I think we're on the right track. I think it's therapeutic to listen to these people talk. There's some very good stories. It's about water, isn't it? We've got 24 inches of snowpack at my house. It's gonna rain next week. We ought to go out and watch that, what happens to that water out there. That might be a good thing to do.
Thank you, Joe. Mark?
I pretty much agree with Joe. I think moving this, I guess, in short, I'll say is I'm not in favor of tabling it. I think the developer needs an answer, yay or nay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel for both sides. It's been 2 years, almost 2 years, and the developer has done a lot, but there's still some things that haven't been done. And again, things that won't be done until after a preliminary site plan is approved to go into more detail. I understand that. So that's kind of where I struggle with, you know, do we table it? Do we deny it? I'm still kind of on the fence on that one right now. I like the layout. I agree with, you know, when you go from Greenridge Apartments to this new development to the single-family homes. Yes, it'd be nice to have single-family homes in there, but this is a nice transition between the two, and that's what we always try to do. I don't know, you know, the comment about the stormwater ponds in the 150-foot easement, I don't know if that's a big deal. I mean, it's better to have nothing there than a building or a pond versus a building. So I'm okay with those being in the 150 at this point. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm still kind of, okay, I'll be quiet.
All right. Tyler?
I'm with Pat. I haven't a clue right now.
Elena?
I think I said a lot of my points that I did before we listened to the residents. Definitely struggling with this one. A lot of history related to this, but yeah, I think that I lean towards. I don't know. I gotta think about this one. This is getting hard.
Patrick?
In the big picture, I don't have a problem with the development itself. I don't think it's in total conflict with the single-family residential neighborhood. I think it is a nice transitional project. I believe actually it's more in continuity with Greenridge Apartments. In fact, if you look at the diagram and everything, one of the entrances, the south entrance to the development, actually crosses whatever that is, North Center. They meet. It's almost like it's more of a continuation of the apartment complex, but with less density. We're zoned for that. I don't have a problem with that part of it. I really was not that knowledgeable regarding the draining and the water issues. Is it possible, I'm new to the commission, so I don't really know the protocols and the procedures. I mean, to give this a PASP with conditions on, you know, something needed to be done more concretely with the drainage and, you know, the water, the residents downstream from that.
Thank you.
Since joining the commission, trying to read through some of these old things, I hear a lot about, you know, we're tabling it for this and we're tabling it for that. And even now, I don't know what's open, I guess, from a deal breaker standpoint, from a study or a missing piece of information that would bring clarity to any of us. I hear a lot of important concerns. I don't understand yet what's open this moment that would provide more clarity. Maybe it's nothing.
Thank you, Tom. From my perspective, in terms of the land use question, I believe that the plan that we have before us, although not perfect, I think is achieves the transition as mentioned by fellow commissioners here. I respect the perspective offered by the consultant, but in terms of looking at all the aspects that he did in terms of compliance or conformance with it, consistency, I believe that it is consistent with the provisions of the density, the character, sensitivity to some of these natural features on the site, the steep slopes, and that going from the 186 to the 162, I believe, enable that to be more clearly met in terms of that aspect of it. The other aspect that I think is a very big here, and I don't think anyone in this room would dispute that drainage, stormwater, how that's handled, how it flows through the property right now, and what the impact would be of this development on that is a question mark. It's a concern. It's a factor that I believe is well recognized by the applicant. I am relying upon city staff and their guidance as far as what needs to be in place for a PASP to qualify for approval. And in my estimation, the information we've been given by the recommendation by the planning director, the commentary provided by the city engineer, I believe it's there to be able to take action on a conditional approval, I believe consistent with the recommendation that was offered by planning director Paula Preby. So we've got some perspective here. I think there's some commonality in terms of what our concerns are, and I sense that there's this plan either does or can fit within this neighborhood area for development. I guess it comes down to whether we collectively, and we won't know this until we have a motion and action taken on it, whether or not what is moved will be supported by a majority of the members that are here tonight. So I think we're at a point, unless there's some additional discussion, of perhaps entertaining a motion as far as what direction we should take at this point.
Well, didn't we vote to table this in the beginning?
It was tabled from before, and we took it off the table, so
Oh,
it's up for
I
consideration.
see. I see.
I think that we also need to think about what the developer asked. They asked for a yes or a no, so does it make sense for us to continue to table this with more conditions if we can't even get them to follow through on the conditions that we laid out in the tabling?
Well, I think in that respect, it's individually, do you feel that they've provided enough information to reflect that it does meet the master plan vision and is consistent with our zoning requirements, and yeah, And I think that's what it comes down to. So we each have to make that determination in determining whether or not to approve, deny, or table. And like I say, what's going to set the tone is that initial motion that's offered. That will be our testing as far as where we're going to go with this tonight. We just need something. Jeff?
I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want to confuse things further, but I was just reviewing the planning director's memo, and she mentions that one of the options is, if the planning commission was so inclined, would be to tentatively deny subject to later review of findings. What isn't mentioned here is that's an option for tentative approval as well. So that if the planning commission wanted to tentatively approve, subject to the submission of proposed findings and conditions, that would be an option as well. I know that her recommendation identifies certain conditions already, or recommends several, but to the extent that the planning commission felt that was not that didn't adequately cover the planning commission's concerns, I'm just putting it out there as another option.
Okay, thank you. If we didn't mention it ahead of time, true to the sign that's in front of them, that is the city attorney. So we've been referring back to him throughout the hearing. My apologies for not clarifying that earlier.
Not just some guy who showed up.
Yeah. Yep.
Now they all hate you. Sorry.
Well, I'm not going to look at any one person to offer a motion. I'm just, we need to have a motion introduced, and I think Robert's rules put some restrictions on my ability to do that, so I look to my fellow commissioners to offer a motion.
Step up.
I think we spent a lot of time, and I think we've gotten together closer than we were. I'm against making a decision tonight, I guess, kind of indefinite about that, unless the rest of you want to do it.
Are you offering a motion of,
I would think, no, I'm not offering a motion at all, but I think Paula's not here, she's sick, and she was in favor of it. The rest of us sort of had some questions about it.
Isn't this fun?
May I ask a question? I mean, a lot of the public comment is about the character of this development and whether or not it transitions well or doesn't, or fits within the character, I guess. As it stands now with the revised plan, I mean, you guys have the history of, from the very beginning, and I've tried to read and understand it, but from your perspectives, are we closer or the same when it comes to this transitional step down in density?
My opinion is this isn't a transitional thing. It goes from apartments to single-family houses. Now, if it was proposed as condominiums, I would say that does fit the transition. That's just my opinion.
One observation I left out regarding the character of the single-family homes in the Greenridge area, and then you've got the Greenridge apartments on the other side, is because this new development will tie into North Center and the shopping center and all of that. There is no through traffic to the single-family homes in the Greenridge neighborhood. So as far as any concerns the residents might have there regarding traffic, I don't see that they're going to see any real difference in traffic. And then according to this, there's, 9? Most of the units in here are 4-unit buildings, most of the buildings. And then there's some 6-unit buildings. So I don't really see, the way it's spread out, that it's truly that dense. So my greater concern is the drainage issues that have been raised. And I think that's a legitimate concern, and somewhere along the line, I would like to see something proposed dealing more with that.
As far as answer to your question, Tom, with respect to improvement and getting there, I think that we are. At least my opinion is that this plan right here is a definite improvement from the initial plan that we reviewed back in 2022, and I think the changes are reflective of the comments that made, the concerns, if not in terms of providing reports or the like to deal with issues. I think it's reflected more so in terms of changes in the design that we have before us this evening. And I'd like to echo the comment the gentleman up front made. Your respect that you've shown this evening, audience, the developer, and the Planning Commission and staff, I think has been exceptional in terms of dealing with this tough issue. And to tell you the truth, if it isn't already evident, it's a tough decision that we're looking at making this evening, and so we're giving it a great deal of thought. So you've been heard, and those major concerns as far as how the impact of the future on this area is very important to everyone. Jeff, in terms of Robert's rules, am I correct that I cannot offer a motion?
You could offer, you could say that you would entertain a motion and then identify what you would entertain, and if someone wants to make that motion, that's appropriate. Then you'd need, somebody would also need to second it.
Okay. Well, unless there's somebody who wants to step up, I think I'm gonna go that route.
I'll make a motion. On case number 23-028, preliminary area site plan review for Greenridge Townhomes, based on the application materials provided, revision date January 5th, 2024. I move to grant temporary approval for the preliminary area site plan for the Greenridge Townhomes project for a new residential development featuring a total of 162 units in 24 4-unit buildings and 11 6-unit buildings with public water, sanitary sewer services at 330, 350, and 740 Greenridge Drive Northwest. We're conditioned on the following. Conditions of temporary approval of preliminary area site plan. The applicant meets the recommendations found within the city engineer's report dated January 11, 2024, and on the attached previous reports. Prior to any final area site plan review, the applicant must submit for the Planning Commission's review any approval, any overall stormwater impact analysis prepared by the applicant's engineer, which analysis should be preceded by a meeting involving the city engineer's office, as well as the Kent County Drain Commissioner's office and other interested parties. The analysis must minimally detail the current stormwater conditions in the vicinity, such as, but not limited to, both the Alpine Walker Drain North Water Course and the unnamed South Water Course, as well as any reasonably anticipated impacts of the project on these conditions. Number 3, an analysis of water rechange into the groundwater system should be carried out as it relates to the impacts of private wells in the area as a result of the development. 4, I have a little change. I think the applicant should provide a comprehensive plan of replacement of trees or vegetation for the project as part of the final area site plan. Number 5, the applicant must either have the U.S., and I'm going to strike number 5, I don't think that's our jurisdiction. 6, other conditions as recommended by the Planning Commission. I don't have any at this point. Findings of fact per section 94-2013 3G. Select what is applicable. The project does conform to the city's master plan. The project does conform to the intent and all the regulations and standards of the zoning ordinance as applicable. The project will be adequately served by public facilities and services such as streets, police and fire protection, and water and sanitary services. Number 4, the common open space, preservation areas, and private elements shown on the preliminary area site plan are so planned that they will achieve a unified system with elements in appropriate locations suitably related to each other, the site, and the surrounding land. 5, the preliminary area site plan layout, design, and relationships between internal private streets and perimeter public streets shall be such that traffic to, from, and within the site and assembly of person in connection therein will not be hazardous or inconvenient to the project or the surrounding area. 6, the Planning Commission did determine that noise, odor, light, and other external effects from any source whatsoever which is connected with the project's residential townhomes use will not unreasonably affect adjacent and neighboring land uses. 7, an internal and external sidewalk system is proposed on the preliminary area site plan. 8, the preliminary area site plan proposes 3 phases of construction. These phases appear to be capable of standing on their own in terms of the present of services, facilities, and open space, and will contain the necessary components to ensure protection of natural resources and the health, safety, and welfare of project users and residents of the surrounding area. This tentative conditional approval may not be relied upon to proceed with development of a final area site plan for submission to the city in accordance with section 94-213 7 until all conditions are set forth herein have been completed. Moreover, matters otherwise addressed in the staff's reports for this development, case number 23-028, for meeting dated January 17, 2024, and not expressly set forth or provided for in this motion must be resolved to the Planning Commission's reasonable satisfaction prior to any final area site plan approval being granted. That is it.
Okay. Got a motion by Mark. Is there support?
I have just a note change. On the motion, it says 24 4 units, 11 6 units. But in Paula's memo, she states 27 4 units, 9 6 units. Looking at the drawing, the motion complies with the drawing. So I just want to make that note in case somebody goes back to the memo that Paula wrote. Okay.
The motion's good.
Is there support?
I'll support that.
Okay, we have a motion supported for a tentative approval, tentative PAS approval of the plan with the enumerated conditions. And I believe as you were listing those out, at the end you indicated if there are other conditions that were should be added to that from the perspective of the other commissioners, that's an opportunity as well. He's kind of left that open. And basically, is that covering enough of it to give assurance, and it gives direction to the applicant, and it provides assurances to the neighbors that their concerns have been heard and that they'll be part of the action in moving from the PASP to eventually to a final area site plan. Jeff?
Substantive issue, and I
for the planning commission, but there was discussion in the consultant's letter about the advisability of reducing that 50-foot setback. What I heard Mr. Lennon say tonight on the record, or Ms. Schultz, I can't recall. Suzanne's fault. That they would be potentially open to that, but they didn't see the point if they weren't gonna potentially get approval. I don't know if that's something you want to consider, but it was raised in the consultant's letter, so I guess I just wanna put it out on the table.
Well, first, I want to get a clarification from the applicant whether that was in fact offered.
I suppose we could look at it if that's, we had not heard before that. So we had not heard before that report from the planning consultant that that was something that was, of interest. We chose to design a project that complied with the ordinance and didn't seek any variances. If that's something that the planning commission desires, I think that's something that would be considered. I don't know that I can agree to that, but I'll let Ms. Schultz address it.
Yeah, I think we'd be open to, I mean, part of this is looking at when you get into detailed site, it's details, right? When you get into feet and inches on final design, and it may make sense when you're working on the grading and the stormwater, if there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, that if we're allowed to have some play. I mean, there's other things that we could change too, like the road width. There's a 26-foot wide road width requirement, which is pretty wide when there's no on-street parking and it's just 2 lanes of residential traffic. But there's definitely areas where you can play with things when you're finding them, but we try to, as Pat mentioned, stick with the ordinance. But if there's a willingness, we can certainly look as we get into the finer details of the site, if there's need to move it a little closer to provide more sensitivity to the eastern edge, that's possible.
Are we to take that as a qualified confirmation?
I'd say a qualified confirmation based on feasibility and if it makes sense on the site, but we don't really know until we get, the first priority, of course, is figuring out and making sure that the stormwater, the design, and that will also influence site design. Site design always comes down to traffic and to stormwater. So if those two things are fully set, it's those details then on those nuances of how the site works, and making sure. So now with the preliminary approval, if we know that this is an acceptable design, then we get into those details and those nuances on whether or not, that there's added things that we can do to make it better.
Well, and as the discussion this evening is whether or not the city will have enough authority at the final area site plan to correct what is considered to be a major flaw.
I wouldn't say it's a major flaw. I think if there's, what we'd be looking for is I guess the question is, the consultant said, the ordinance is 50 feet. We're fine with 50 feet. And that doesn't have to, if it causes confusion to deviate from that, well, we can stick with the 50 feet. But if there is need to make some minor adjustments of the site, it is a little bit more sensitive as we go through all those details, we could work with the planning commission on that. But I don't want to commit to moving everything if it's gonna harm the project.
Okay. I guess in that respect, is the motion maker or the sport willing to add that as a condition?
I don't know how to word it.
So what I heard was that the developer would commit to review and report back to the planning commission for the planning commission's review and approval, further steps to maximize the preservation area as called out in the consultant's letter.
But limited to that 50 feet along North Central.
Suzanne mentioned the drive.
Yeah.
There may be other things, that's up to your creativity.
I'm concerned about making that a condition if it's not pretty specific. Yeah.
And I think it also comes to working with staff. The road width requirement is a city requirement, a staff requires. So, it would, part of it's not in our control.
But it is a PUD.
Scott, is that road width set by fire and police, I would assume?
Yes, it's come under great scrutiny for a long time, and it's what the city has been comfortable with. If the city wanted to go to more of a Grand Rapids style policy where everything was narrower, like, it'd be a big decision, but you could do that for private developments.
I would just suggest to Mr. Sluggett and the planning commission, as they're crafting the condition, that it be, you know, we may not be comfortable with the shift, and if that is the case, then it's important to us that that not negate the approval.
No, but it would still, but these are all conditions that you still need to comply with before you can even move forward to the FASP.
Yeah,
This would simply be another one, subject to the planning commission's review and approval. And if it can't be done, presumably you can articulate that and sell it to the planning commission, and they'll say, okay, you've maximized preservation efforts.
Well,
That's all I'm suggesting.
But the 50-foot area that is identified by the consultant, I think we can look at that on the plan and say, okay, that looks like an area where we can, you know, push the structures closer to the road if that's preferred. But I'm concerned about making that sort of a site-wide sort of analysis. If you'd like to add the width of the drives as well, as long as it's specific enough, I think we can be sure we understand what our charge is. What would concern us is if we invest in a stormwater, you know, engineering, if that's the path we choose, if that's the condition that's imposed, and then somebody undoes the approval because of a disagreement over this 50-foot area, which to us is kind of, you know, less significant, that would be troublesome for us, that's all. So I
Okay, we're getting down to.
yeah, I know, it's starting
Too
to get
much
too granular.
detail. I think what we're looking at is the concept of the impact on the buffer, the perimeter buffer, because I think that's the area where it was suggested by the consultant that's where that could be accomplished.
North Central Drive.
Yeah, so I think if you said specifically the 50-foot setback on North Center Drive, which is where the consultant was talking about potential wiggle room that the planning commission could waive some setback requirements. So if it's within that 50-foot front setback along Center Drive and road widths, and that was limited to that, that'd be fine.
Yeah, that we understand.
Mark?
Thanks, Jerry. As a condition of approval, we would like to, I don't know what to, we'd like the developer to address the McKinnon report that it does not adequately protect natural features as envisioned by the master plan. Does that cover it?
So that's problematic for us because that's what we feel like we've already done. You know, because we feel that we did address the master plan. What we've heard is that the area where you see those,
Well, we could just get specific.
The 50-foot area.
You mentioned in particular the setback along
North Central.
North Central Drive.
We
Focus upon that.
Yeah, we would, if the condition focus is limited to the 50-foot area along North Central Drive, that we are willing to examine.
All right. Added condition, we would like the developer to address the 50-foot front setback along North Center Drive, and whether or not they can sacrifice natural features elsewhere on the site. The setback is not required under, well, I don't need to add that. So again, we would like the developer to address the 50-foot center setback, 50-foot front setback along North Center Drive.
And that's fine, as long as that's the only area. Is that the only condition?
That's, if you could please be seated.
Sure.
And I'd look to Patrick. Are you in agreement with what
Yeah, the
Mark
last
would?
condition.
Yes. Okay. Are there any, again, he left it open for any other conditions. Here's an opportunity. If there's something that's still hanging out there, that it wasn't covered by what Mark laid out. Otherwise, we may be able to call the question and on this, on the motion that's on the table. Let's call the question.
I think it should be an individual poll.
You want a roll call vote on it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so understand, we've got a motion on the table for conditional approval, tentative conditional approval on the plan at hand. Let's see, who's,
I made the motion, so I'll go first. I vote yes.
Pat?
No.
Yes?
No.
No.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe. Okay. Oh, we've got 8 members here tonight. 4 to 4.
That means it dies according to Robert's rules.
Okay, Robert's rules, Jeff?
So the motion fails.
Motion fails. Okay. That leaves it open for another motion to be introduced. Jeff?
Including, if you're so inclined, there's one member missing, obviously. Tabling until you have not to your next meeting, if you're so inclined.
Now, question is on that, we would have to poll the vote again. We wouldn't look to Scott and say, Scott, you gotta decide.
No, someone would have to, that motion failed, so there'd have to be a new motion.
New motion.
And it wouldn't have to be that motion, it could be any motion.
Which would mean tabling it right now.
If
But-
that's what you're inclined to do, or if somebody wants to make another motion now, you can.
Yep.
We can ask for another motion.
You said that you could do a temporary or a tentative motion for denial unless they meet these expectations. Is that how that would work?
Well,
Sorry.
two different ways. Paula outlined in her report on page 10 that if the inclination of the planning commission was to deny, that you could deny and then identify, this is B on that page, deny and then set forth the findings, and as we would encourage you to identify specific standards in the zoning ordinance you were relying upon for that denial and tie the facts to those standards, or alternatively, tentatively deny and direct staff to present findings for action at your next meeting.
Or we could let it die.
Well, I think some action needs to be taken. I mean, they have an application in front of the.
If it doesn't, if the affirmative doesn't go through, what is the opposite?
Don't know,
That would be the negative.
but I don't know what the vote would be.
Well, no, we already voted. The affirmative did not go
Only
through.
the affirmative failed. The whole thing didn't fail. Only the affirmative vote failed, right?
That particular affirmative vote with those particular conditions failed.
Right.
So only that part failed, but you still have to take this approval denial or take.
I don't agree. If there's no action taken on it, it's denied now. There was a vote to approve it,
Only the motion to approve is denied.
which is a motion to not approve it.
But the application's still
That wasn't-
pending in front of
Yep.
the city.
But that wasn't
That's-
the motion for denial.
specifically talk to that issue? If we have more silence, I'm gonna take the initiative to offer a motion to see whether anyone would wanna propose that motion, support that motion, and a support to that support.
Could we do a table until we, like, can our table be until we have 9 members present for it?
Sure.
Okay. I make a motion that we table this application, oh shoot, now I gotta find this, sorry. Application case number 23028 PSAP review for the River Ridge Townhomes based on the approval. I move to table this preliminary site plan until 9 members of the planning commission are present for a vote.
Presumably your next meeting.
Presumably our next meeting.
Do we have support?
It's not problematic that that commissioner is not taking part in this discussion?
They'll have the minutes available to them and they'll have the complete record.
And it doesn't preclude someone that's voted one way or another on this one to change their mind as well. All we need is the support to get a vote on this.
I'll support that.
Okay, motion by Elena, supported by Patrick. Patrick, you're a good guy. To table action on this until the next meeting where we have a full complement of 9 members on the board.
If we don't have a full complement of 9 members, if somebody's on
Shouldn't it just be an odd number with quorum?
Yeah, I mean, if we have 7, we would be fine, right?
I'm just saying, it's,
I'm,
Just to,
Should I-
to less qualified, maybe just.
should I say
table it to
until
the-
we have an odd number?
Well, just, how about just to your next meeting?
Okay, I'm gonna table this case until our next planning commission meeting.
Okay, is there support? And I think yeah, so we're looking, and the reason is because we had a impasse with 8 members here, and we want to, for the benefit of the audience, the neighbors, as well as the applicant, to have the opportunity to have a motion and action taken on this request. Is that fair to say, Elena and Patrick? Okay.
Yeah, right, that one.
Yep. All right, we're gonna call the motion. Call the question.
Wait, here, I'm a little slow here. What are we voting on now?
To table, we're looking to table action on the request until the next meeting.
Are we just sort of tabling things right now?
Yep. So conceivably, what is it 2 weeks off now?
3 weeks, cause January got 5.
Okay.
February 7.
So we'll put, in effect, table it for 3 weeks. Okay?
Yeah, I'm for that, yes.
Okay. Okay, we'll go roll call again. We'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I'm for tabling for till 3 weeks, yes.
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 Okay, the motion passes. We appreciate your patience. And in 3 weeks, we're going to reconvene, and this will be on the agenda to allow for action to be taken. Thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Jeff?
I'm sorry, if there's, any additional information, forms or anything from staff,
Chair, can you make a motion for them to go out in the hallway? So we can-
Okay.
I'm not suggesting raising the same.
Excuse me? Yeah, would you be able to move out in the hall, please? We want to finish up this meeting right here, and we want to get some things clarified for everyone's benefit.
Is there any way that we could make or request that the engineer be present so that some of these questions that we do have can be addressed more with them being there?
Ask him.
Okay, can you have your engineer be here at the next meeting so that more of these informational engineering calculation questions can be addressed related to stormwater?
I assume so. I mean, I don't, I'll have to talk to my client about everything, but I assume so. And in looking at the condition, if whatever you do, whether it's tenant approval, tenant denial, which is the way it feels like it's going, in either of those cases, they both contemplate very, I think, extensive engineering analysis, even before we can get to FASB. So, maybe that is sufficient, but I'll certainly inquire. We'll let you know that before the meeting. For sure.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah, thank you.
Jeff, do you think you could explain a little bit more for next time so we're more prepared about this tentative approval versus tentative denial on it? Just as it's something that we don't address often, I understand it, but I just want to make sure that more time to think on it for the next meeting.
It's not taken lightly, just, when there's that much, I don't wanna call it this, cause we're not fighting, but when there's that much,
Tyler,
sorry,
Pat, Mark, Jeff is speaking right now.
he's a lawyer, come on.
No one listens to us.
I was just saying, Elena had asked about the concept of using a tentative action with subsequent findings then approved. I'm sure Mr. Lennon will not approve of this, but it's not uncommon, particularly when you have a really big record like this one, and it's gone on for a really long time, and candidly, there's a chance of litigation, to identify as clearly as you can and as completely as you can the bases for the Planning Commission's decision, rather than having to do that on the fly, i.e. like tonight, and saying, okay, well, we're gonna approve it, and here are the standards, and here's all the facts. That takes a long time. Oftentimes in that situation, it's preferable to simply tentatively take action, but it's conditioned on subsequently then approving findings. And typically staff's gonna put those findings together based on the record, and then you can approve them or not, or add to them, or amend them, but you're not, so you're basically telling the applicant, here's where it's going, pro or con, but all the reasons for that will be determined at your next meeting. Does that kind of make sense?
So we could have okay, yeah.
Right. So tonight, for example, had there been a desire by a majority to tentatively deny, we could have done that, and then staff would have come back with findings at your next meeting. And you still have to approve those findings. Until those findings are approved, the denial isn't official.
Gotcha, okay.
So.
That makes sense.
Just, I don't know if we're still on the record or the meeting's closed.
No, it's still open.
Oh, it is
Still
still,
open.
I was just sort of we feel like we've done our public hearing part, so in terms of even coming back again, going through the whole.
Right.
Anyway, so I don't know how excited the client would be about bringing the engineer back, but to the extent there's particular questions.
I think that engineer, from my point, is so that I can ask questions to the engineer.
Yeah, please-
I'm an engineer myself, so I have questions to ask the engineer.
Please don't come back without him, because I can't defend the engineering on your project. Okay?
And we just thought we were gonna talk about the master plan, so we told them, like, it's snowy out, you can stay home, so.
Oh, somebody should have told me that.
You're not so lucky. Thank you all for your time tonight. Rough weather night.
Wow,
Appreciate all your consideration.
Yep.
Drive safe.
fun stuff.
Yeah, you're supposed to have this done.
So anything else, Jeff?
Shut up.
Okay. All right.
But frankly, oh no, there.
So we've kicked the can for another 3 weeks. But at the same time, this is gonna give us all a chance to digest this tonight. And you may have an assignment after that next meeting, as a result of a motion, that either to provide rationale to deny or rationale to approve. And so that's kind of the homework for you guys to think about as to if it goes one way or another, just what type of things are going to be important to provide to us to back up that decision. Yep. Yeah, because, and I think that you will have the assistance of the city attorney's office in doing that.
I'm uncomfortable with a tentative approval.
I'm uncomfortable with the tentative approval.
Or, yeah, tentative denial is pretty easy. You come back with,
Findings of fact.
with findings to just solidify it. Tentative approval, man, that is, I don't know how you're gonna get out of that.
Well, it could be a outright approval, outright denial, but in each case, you're gonna need to have some information that would support either one of those actions.
The use of a tentative approval is something new to me, and maybe that's something, that other communities use, but I haven't seen that in 25 years. And
It would simply be, my thought, Frank, was it would allow staff to really vet the potential conditions.
Yeah.
And rather than, as unfortunately we're somewhat doing tonight, trying to do it on the fly in response to comments made during the meeting.
Yeah.
That was the thought. It was really the conditions, not the findings.
And I'm comfortable with a conditional approval, but when I saw the word tentative and temporary in that model motion that Paula put together for you, I thought, what does this mean? We've never done this before.
And I think that that's where I kind of struggle too, is like trying to come up with all those things on the fly, like you were saying, like, this is just, I mean, this is not something we typically have up here and try not to have, but if that's the way that we have to go, then that's the way we're going to go.
Well, and that's where I'm saying that we're gonna have to rely upon city staff to help us. If it's not tentative, it's just either a final approval or a final denial. We have to have the ammunition to justify that decision.
My opinion would be then just say, hey, conditional approval subject to the following. It's just a lot more straightforward for staff to follow up. It's a lot more straightforward for the applicant. The public will know what is being conditioned. And I would, if you did a conditional approval with all of the conditions that you talked about tonight, I would say that, all right, then when your final area site plan comes in, you have to have all these things ready to roll. They can't be subject to debate during your final area site plan. Practically, that's the way that I would apply that. If there's an intermediate step, which is kind of what I'm interpreting there, I think that gets really gray, and it puts, in my opinion, a lot of unnecessary stress on your staff to try and figure out what they've done, what they haven't done, where we are in the process.
Well, and I think we already have the information. You guys put out an opinion.
I know, that's
papers.
Yeah.
And we can either take that or not, which we kind of did tonight.
Yeah.
So now I think at our next meeting, I'm gonna have written down what my thoughts are.
Yeah.
This, if I'm for it, I'm for it. If I'm against it, I'm against it.
Yeah.
Just be ready with fire away.
And just list your conditions to deny or approve. And I think Jeff's right, a tentative denial, if you're not prepared to have all the findings of fact, particularly because this would probably be litigated, then I would say tentative denial, subject to staff and the city attorney working on findings with the chair to present at the next planning commission meeting to formalize the denial. I'm fine with that. I just don't want us to get too fuzzy on a tentative approval and how that lays out practically in the workflow. Where is that? Does all that have to be done before they can apply for final area site plan? I would kind of say that's a little bit unreasonable because a lot of that content is going to be final area site plan. So practically, I would interpret that as, here you go, when your application comes in for FASP, you've got to have all this material along with it.
All right. For those of you on this side of your first meeting with the Planning Commission, thank you very much. You've really in the frying pan right away. And we appreciate your respect for the process and your participation, and we're looking forward to more.
I am as well.
We are. All right.